The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Zuri Bellamy was elbow-deep in a sink full of dirty dinner plates when her phone buzzed inside her apron pocket. She ignored it the first time. The second time, she handed her sponge to the busboy beside her, dried her hands on the back of her uniform, and checked the screen. It was a formal notification from Arkwright Capital Management. Effective immediately, Ms. Bellamy's employment has been terminated due to gross professional misconduct and violation of company confidentiality protocols. She read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. Her hands weren't shaking. She noticed that, and almost laughed at herself because she thought they would be. Instead, she felt something cold settle in the center of her chest and stay there. She put the phone back in her pocket, picked up the sponge, and finished washing the rest of the dishes. She didn't cry until she got home, and then she couldn't stop. That was 2 years ago. She should have fought it. She knew that. Her mentor at the firm had told her to fight it. Her mother had told her to fight it. 3 different employment attorneys in 3 different free consultations she scraped together during lunch breaks all told her she had a viable wrongful termination case with real teeth. But fighting costs money. Fighting costs time. Fighting costs the kind of energy that a 25-year-old newly pregnant woman living alone in a city that doesn't care about her simply did not have. So Zuri Bellamy did not fight. She survived instead. If you've ever worked a double shift in a restaurant kitchen, you know what the last 2 hours feel like. Your feet stop sending useful information to your brain around hour 6. By hour 10, your lower back has filed a formal complaint that your body is choosing to ignore. By hour 12, you're running on the memory of food and the knowledge that your tips are sitting in your apron and that those tips are the reason your daughter is going to eat this week. Serene on a Friday night was organized chaos dressed in ambient lighting and imported glassware. Korean fusion cuisine at prices that made Zuri's stomach turn when she thought too long about them. $12 miso butter amuse-bouches, $40 Wagyu sliders. A tasting menu that cost more than her monthly electric bill. She carried these plates with both hands and set them down in front of people who barely looked at her, and she smiled, and she refilled their water, and she memorized their faces long enough to anticipate what they'd need before they needed it. Because that was the difference between a decent tip and a great one. She was good at this job. She hated that she was good at this job. 27 years old. A financial analysis degree from Northwestern, graduated 3rd in her class. 18 months at Arkwright Capital before the letter. 2 years of waiting tables at 3 different restaurants before she landed at Serene Stationen, which paid better than anywhere else she'd worked and had a manager who didn't look at her like a problem to be managed. Her daughter's name was Nyla, 2 years old, thick curls in her grandmother's eyes, and a laugh that Zuri could hear in her head during the worst moments of a shift, which was the only thing that reliably kept her moving. Nyla was with Mrs. Okonkwo next door tonight. Mrs. Okonkwo was 68 and retired, and had grandchildren who only called on holidays and a soft spot for Zuri that expressed itself as casseroles left outside the door and a refusal to accept more than $20 a night for watching the baby. Zuri had tried to pay her fairly. Mrs. Okonkwo had looked at her like she'd said something offensive and closed the door. At 9:47 p.m., Table 14 asked for a second bottle of the Sansere. At 9:52 p.m., Table 9 flagged her down because someone at the table had a sudden concern about whether the broth contained anchovy paste. At 9:58 p.m., Zuri set a full tray of appetizers on the service station, turned to pick it up, and the room tilted sideways. She grabbed the edge of the station. The tray rattled but didn't fall. She stood very still, waiting for the tilt to correct itself, and it mostly did, but her vision had gone gray at the edges in a way that she recognized and had been ignoring for 3 days. The gray stayed. Her left hand wasn't gripping the station properly. She could see her fingers on the metal surface, but they felt far away, like watching someone else's hand through a window. Not here, she thought. Not in front of. She went down between tables 11 and 12. She didn't feel herself hit the floor. The first thing she was aware of was carpet. Not restaurant carpet, that industrial low-pile stuff that exists only to hide stains. This was something else, dense and quiet under her cheek, the kind of carpet that costs more per square foot than she made in a week. Duh. No, she registered that before she registered anything else, which probably said something about the state of her mind. The second thing she was aware of was that someone was watching her. She could feel it before she opened her eyes. A particular quality of attention, focused and completely still. She opened her eyes. The room was an office. Private, not large, but furnished with the specific restraint of someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. A desk that was probably worth 4 figures. Bookshelves with actual books in them. A window with the Chicago skyline visible beyond it, the lake somewhere beyond that in the dark. The man sitting in the chair 3 feet away from her was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not concern, exactly, not indifference either. Something in between, or something else entirely, that she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. He was Korean American, she guessed. 40, maybe a little older. Dressed like someone who made decisions worth a great deal of money. He would sit perfectly still, one ankle crossed over one knee, hands loose in his lap, and he was looking at her with the calm of a person who has never once panicked in his life. "Don't sit up too fast," he said. His English was unaccented, American, completely flat. "You were out for about 4 minutes." Zuri sat up too fast. The room moved again. She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead and breathed through it until everything settled. "I said don't. I heard you." She got herself upright and took stock of where she was. Someone had placed a pillow under her head and a folded jacket over her shoulders. She looked at the jacket and then at him. "Did you carry me up here?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were on the floor of my restaurant, and I didn't particularly want you to stay there." His restaurant. She looked around the room again. Serene. Of course. She'd worked here for 8 months and never once seen the owner. That wasn't unusual. Most owners of high-end Chicago restaurants were investors first, restaurateurs second, and usually more interested in the quarterly numbers than in watching the service floor. She'd assumed this one was the same. The man in the chair was watching her process this without helping her along. "I'm fine," she said. "I'll go back too." "You won't." He said it like he was reading something off a page. "Not tonight. I need those tips." "Your tips have been covered." Keisha told the table you had a family emergency and redistributed the section. "Your total for the evening has already been calculated and will be in your next check." Zuri looked at him. "How do you know Keisha's name?" "I know everyone who works for me. I've never seen you in here before." "I've seen you." He uncrossed his ankle and leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Zuri Bellamy, 27, Northwestern, class of 2019. Financial analysis. You've been working doubles 4 nights a week for the last 6 weeks. You eat 1 meal per shift usually, something from the family meal that you don't finish. You take your tips in cash and you put them in a specific pocket in your apron that you check every time you walk back through the kitchen door. He paused. You're also 3 months behind on your renter's insurance, which I know because your building uses the same property management company as 2 of my investment properties. The room was very quiet. Zuri said, "That's a significant amount of information about a waitress." "It is. Why do you know it?" He didn't answer immediately. He sat back. His eyes moved to her apron, still twisted around her waist, and something shifted in his expression. Something that hadn't been there before. "There's something on the floor," he said. Zuri looked down. The photograph had fallen out of her apron pocket when they carried her up. It was a 4x6 print she'd had made at a Walgreens 3 weeks ago, slightly bent now at one corner, lying face up on the expensive carpet. Nyla at the park, 18 months old in the picture, so about 6 months back. Standing in a pile of autumn leaves looking absolutely furious about something, probably the wind. Stade, which Nyla had recently decided was a personal affront, and simultaneously so beautiful that Zuri had printed the photo and carried it with her ever since, because some days you need to look at something that matters to get through the next hour. She moved to pick it up. "Can I see it?" It wasn't a question exactly. It didn't have the shape of a question, but it also wasn't a demand. It was something in between, offered and waiting, and Zuri couldn't have explained why she handed it to him. He took the photograph and looked at it. Whatever she'd expected, polite acknowledgement, a return, she didn't get it. He looked at the photograph with an attention that seemed disproportionate. The way he'd looked at her when she first opened her eyes, that specific quality of stillness. His jaw shifted. Something moved through his face that was gone before she could name it. He handed it back. Your daughter, he said. Yes. She lives with you. Obviously. Her father. Not in the picture. Zuri tucked the photograph back into her apron. In any sense, he was quiet for a moment. Then I have an offer for you. I don't need, not charity. He said it without sharpness, just correction. A job. A different job. I need a personal executive assistant for my legitimate business operations. The position pays $200,000 annually, benefits included, with access to professional childcare during working hours and a driver for necessary travel. Zuri stared at him. I'm a waitress, she said. You're a former financial analyst who is currently working as a waitress. Those are different things. He met her eyes. I read your performance reviews from Arkwright Capital. You were exceptional. Your termination was not performance-related. The cold thing in her chest, the one that had settled there 2 years ago, when she read the letter, shifted and tightened. How did you get my performance reviews? Carefully. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. He stood up. He was taller than she'd registered from the floor and crossed to the desk. He opened a drawer and set a folder on the edge of the desk closest to her. You should look at that before you decide anything. She didn't touch the folder. Who are you exactly? Kang Seon-jae. I own Serene and several other businesses in Chicago and elsewhere. He said it the way you'd give someone directions. Turn left at the light, and I knew your father. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Zuri had not spoken about her father to anyone in this city. Malcolm Bellamy had died in a construction accident when she was 19. A scaffold collapse on the south side. He'd been working as a site supervisor for a contracting company that no longer existed. The company had settled with her mother for a number out of court that had seemed large at the time, and that Zuri now knew had been an insult disguised as compensation. Her mother had moved back to Detroit afterward. Zuri had stayed. She had a photograph of him, too. She didn't carry that one. You knew him, she said. Not a question. Testing the weight of the words. He worked for my family when I was young. Seon-jae had not moved from beside the desk. He was watching her with that same unreadable stillness. He was more than an employee. He was stopped. Started again. He mattered to us, to me specifically. My father was a construction worker. Among other things, yes. Something in the way he said it made her stomach drop. What does that mean? It means the story you were told about how he spent his working life was incomplete. He looked at her steadily. I'm not going to have this entire conversation tonight. You just passed out on my floor, and you need food and water and approximately 8 hours of sleep. But I want you to take that folder home, and I want you to read it, and I want you to call the number on the inside cover when you're ready to talk. Zuri didn't move. Why, she said. Why now? Why any of this? Why tonight? Because I've been looking for you for 4 months, Seon-jae said, and 3 weeks ago I found out that you've had 2 men sitting in a car outside your building, taking photographs of your daughter. The room went very still. What? Black Tahoe, rotating license plates, always the same 2 men. They've been there most nights for the past 6 weeks. His voice hadn't changed. It remained flat, informational, the voice of someone delivering a briefing. But his eyes were watching her with something that wasn't quite detachment anymore. I believe I know who sent them. The folder explains why. He paused. This is the part where you stop being careful and start being worried. Miss Bellamy, because whoever those men are, they've been photographing a 2-year-old child. Zuri's hand had moved to her apron pocket, to the photograph. Her fingers found it and pressed against it through the fabric. Who sent them? She said. Someone you know. He pulled out the chair behind his desk and sat down, not moving away, just resettling, giving her space to absorb what he'd said. Someone who has recently discovered that his financial situation is considerably worse than it was a year ago, and who is looking for any leverage available to him. She already knew the name before he said it. She knew it the same way you know a cold front is coming before the temperature actually drops. Something in the air changes. Something shifts. "Bennett," she said. Seon-jae's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. A slight sharpening, a fractional acknowledgement. "Take the folder home. Ms. Bellamy." She took the folder home. She sat at her kitchen table after Mrs. Okonkwo went home and after Nyla was in bed. With a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink, and her phone face down beside her because she couldn't look at it, and she read every page. It took her 2 hours. The first thing in the folder was a personnel file. Not hers, her father's. Malcolm Jerome Bellamy, 44 at the time of his death. Certified construction supervisor, yes, but also security consultant, personal protection specialist, informal liaison between two worlds that were not supposed to touch. The file used careful language, the language of someone who wrote things down, knowing that documents outlast intentions. But the picture it built was clear. Her father had spent a decade and a half working for a man named Kang Dong-hyun, the patriarch of a Korean-American business family with interests that extended well beyond the legitimate enterprises they publicly operated. He'd started as a driver. He'd become a bodyguard. Eventually, he'd become something closer to a trusted member of the household, the person who taught the elder Kang's teenage son to drive a car on a parking lot in Evanston at 2 in the morning, who sat with the boy after a particularly bad night and didn't say anything useful, but stayed anyway, because sometimes staying is the whole thing. Her father, teaching a Korean crime boss's son how to parallel park. Zuri set the page down and looked at the ceiling for a while. The second section was a financial record. Tuition payments, housing stipends, scholarship funds routed through 3 different foundations, all of it landing, eventually, in accounts that had funded Zuri's undergraduate education at Northwestern. Anonymous sources they'd seemed at the time. Merit-based grants. She'd been so relieved to get them that she hadn't asked hard questions about where exactly the money came from. She was asking them now, 4 years too late, sitting in a kitchen that smelled like Nyla's dinner, and the small lavender candle lit Gashi the evenings. The evening felt like it needed something. The third section was the part that made her hands unsteady. Surveillance photographs. The black Tahoe, exactly as Seon-jae had described it. Her building's front entrance, the parking lot. The playground across the street where she took Nyla on weekend mornings, when the weather was okay. And Nyla, photographed at a distance, blurry at the edges, but unmistakably Nyla on the swings, in her red jacket, laughing at something out of frame. The name at the top of the section was Bennett Arkwright, with an asterisk, and below it, see also, Sterling Arkwright, Arkwright Capital Management, current SEC investigation, status, ongoing. She knew about the SEC investigation. It had been in the financial news 6 weeks ago. She'd read the article once and moved on, because she'd spent 2 years deliberately not thinking about the Arkwrights, and she was committed to the practice. She read the summary page now. Arkwright Capital's flagship fund had lost 40% of its value over the past 18 months through a combination of bad bets and, if the investigation bore out, some accounting practices that would be described in court as creative. Sterling Arkwright, Bennett's father and the company's founder, was seriously ill, some vague reference to cardiac issues. Bennett had been positioned to inherit the firm for the past several years and had reportedly been managing it with mixed results for the past 2. The fund's collapse was threatening to take other Arkwright holdings with it. Real estate, private equity stakes, a majority position in a Chicago area tech company. Everything Sterling had spent 40 years building was in motion, unstable, looking for something to hold on to. And Bennett had apparently decided that something was a 2-year-old girl in a red jacket on a swing set. Zuri sat with that for a long time. She thought about the termination letter. The language of it: gross professional misconduct, violation of confidentiality protocols, language designed to be difficult to fight, expensive to disprove, the kind of language that makes a 25-year-old pregnant woman calculating the cost of a legal battle decide that survival is more pressing than justice. She thought about Bennett 18 months into their relationship, telling her she was the smartest woman he'd ever met. The way he'd said it, like it was a fact he'd discovered and was generously sharing with her. The way she'd believed him. She thought about the morning she'd told him she was pregnant, and the way his face had done something she hadn't had a name for at the time. She had one now. She'd had it for a while, actually, but she'd refused to use it because naming it made it permanent. Calculation. His face had calculated. And then 6 weeks later, effective immediately, Miss Bellamy's employment has been terminated. She closed the folder. She looked at her phone. She looked at the folder again. Then she got up, went to Nyla's room, and stood in the doorway for a while, watching her daughter sleep the way only children sleep, completely, with their whole bodies, some invisible weight lifted that adults never quite get rid of. Nyla's arm was around a stuffed elephant Mrs. Okonkwo had given her. Her mouth was slightly open. She'd kicked off one sock in her sleep, as she always did, because the socks were apparently offensive to her in some way that she lacked the vocabulary to fully articulate. Zuri stood in the doorway for 5 minutes, maybe more. Then she went back to the kitchen, picked up the folder, opened the inside cover, and looked at the phone number written there in neat handwritten digits. She did not call it that night, but she put the number in her phone. And she didn't sleep. The SUV was waiting outside her building at 8 the next morning. She hadn't called. She'd sat with the number in her phone for most of the night, arguing with herself the way you argue with yourself when you already know what you're going to decide, but you haven't admitted it yet. By 4 in the morning, she'd recognized the argument for what it was and stopped having it. By 6, she'd gotten up, made coffee, dressed Nyla, and put her in the stroller for an early walk around the block, because she needed to think clearly, and the kitchen felt too small. The Tahoe was still there. Different license plates than the ones in the photographs. But the same 2 men. She'd walk past them without looking. Or she'd tried. The man in the passenger seat had turned his head to watch her as she passed. And something about the quality of his attention, the same quality she'd felt in Seon-jae's office, focused and completely still, except cold where Seon-jae's had been merely unreadable, had made her walk faster without meaning to. She'd called the number from the corner. Seon-jae had answered on the second ring. "The SUV will be there at 8, was all he'd said. "You can bring your daughter." He'd already hung up before she processed that he'd said you can, not you should, not you must. An option offered, not a command issued. She stood on the corner, thinking about that distinction for longer than was probably useful. The SUV driver's name was Daniel. He was young, maybe 24, polite without being servile, and he spent the drive not looking at them in the mirror, which Zuri appreciated. Nyla fell asleep with her cheek against the window 10 minutes into the drive, which was typical. She slept in cars the way adults sleep on long flights, immediately and completely, some evolutionary response to motion that Zuri envied deeply. The estate was north of the city, lakefront, past the kind of gate that exists not to keep people in, but to make very clear what the cost of coming in uninvited would be. Security cameras at intervals she didn't bother counting. The driveway was long enough that you lost sight of the gate before you reached the house. The house itself was not what she'd expected. She'd expected something that announced itself. Glass and steel and architectural aggression, the architectural equivalent of a man who needs you to know he's successful. Instead, the house was older, brick and timber, set into the landscape rather than imposed on it, with mature trees that had clearly been there longer than the security system, and a front porch that had the specific, slightly uneven quality of something that was actually used. There was a child's wading pool on the porch, deflated, folded over the railing. She stared at it as Daniel opened the car door. Nyla woke up and looked at the house with the unfiltered judgment that only toddlers can produce, brow slightly furrowed, processing. "Bye," Nyla said finally. "Yes," Zuri said. "Big. We going in? We're going in." Seon-jae met them at the door. He was wearing a different suit than the night before, charcoal, no tie, and he looked like he'd slept, which she resented slightly. He looked at Nyla the way he'd looked at the photograph, with attention that seemed disproportionate, arrested something turning over behind his eyes. Nyla looked back at him with the complete confidence of a person who has never once worried about making a first impression. Then she said, "Why are you sad?" Seon-jae looked down at the 2-year-old standing in his doorway with her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. "I'm not sad," he said. Nyla considered this. Her judgment of it was evident. Your eyes are, she said, and walked past him into the house like she'd been invited, which she had been, but still. Zuri watched Seon-jae watch her daughter disappear into the hallway. Something in the set of his shoulders had changed. Just slightly. Like something that had been braced had let go. She said, she does that to everyone. Don't take it personally. He looked at her. I'm not, he said, and something in his voice, for the first time since she'd met him, had a crack in it that sounded almost human. Come inside, Ms. Bellamy. There's a great deal I need to tell you. She followed him in. Outside, the black Tahoe with the rotating license plates sat 3 blocks from her building. Empty now, the 2 men inside it, checking their phones, waiting for a woman and a little girl to come back. They would wait for a while. The house was too quiet for what it contained. That was the first thing Zuri noticed as Seon-jae led her through the entryway and into a long hallway that opened eventually into a kitchen, large enough to park 2 cars in. Not empty quiet. There were people here. She could feel them, the specific atmospheric pressure of a house with staff and security and layers of function running beneath the surface. But no one appeared. No one interrupted. Doors that probably led to other rooms stayed closed. It was the quiet of a place that had been arranged, deliberately, to feel like it wasn't. Nyla had no opinion about the quiet. She had already spotted a large sectional sofa in the adjoining sitting room and was making purposeful progress toward it. Nyla, Zuri's voice was automatic. It's fine. Seon-jae said it without turning around. Let her. You don't know her. She's going to dismantle it. The sofa can be reassembled. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen island and gestured toward it. Sit down, you didn't eat breakfast. Zuri stopped walking. How do you know I didn't eat breakfast? Sets. Because you got your daughter ready and called my number and got in the car in under 2 hours. And I know what your kitchen looks like from the surveillance file on your building, and there is no scenario in which you had time to eat. He opened a cabinet and retrieved 2 mugs without looking at her. Coffee. It wasn't a question. She sat down. From the sitting room came the sound of Nyla negotiating with a throw pillow. Aggressively. Seon-jae poured coffee and set 1 mug in front of her and kept the other 4 of himself. And then he sat down across the island and looked at her with that quality of attention she'd beginning to understand was simply how he was fully present, completely contained, not performing either warmth or coldness. You read the folder, he said. All of it. And I want you to start from the beginning. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Not the summary, not the selected pages you decided I needed to see. The actual beginning, my father, your family, what happened, and why none of it was ever told to me. Something moved across his face. Not discomfort exactly. More like someone taking the weight of a thing they've been holding and shifting it to both hands. My father's name was Kang Dong-hyun, he said. He came to this country in 987 with enough money to start a small import business and enough contacts to make sure that business grew in ways that weren't entirely legitimate. By the time I was born, he had interests in shipping, real estate, and several other areas that I won't characterize right now. He paused. He was not a gentle man. He was effective and he was loyal to the people he considered his, and those are the best things I can say about him without lying. And my father worked for him. Starting in 1998, Malcolm was 31. He came through a security contractor. My father used background checks, came back clean. References were good. And apparently within the first week, he told my father directly that one of his existing guards was passing information to a competitor. He looked at his coffee. My father kept the guard around for 2 more weeks to feed him bad information and then let him go. After that, he trusted Malcolm completely. Zuri's jaw had tightened. She could feel it. My father was not. She stopped. Started again. He was a construction worker. That's what he told us. My whole life, he was both. The construction work was real. The company he worked for was legitimate, and he was genuinely good at the job. But the security work paid better, and it kept him close to a man who took care of the people he trusted. Seon-jae looked up. Malcolm never told your mother the full truth. That was his decision, and I won't defend or criticize it. But I want you to understand that he wasn't living a double life because he was careless. He was doing it because he believed the less your family knew, the safer they were. He believed wrong. Yes, Seon-jae said, without any attempt to soften it. He did. She appreciated that. She hadn't expected to, but she did. How old were you? She said. When he started working for your father. 14. Something shifted in his voice. Barely perceptible, like a board settling in an old floor. My mother had died the year before. My father was occupied. Malcolm used to sit in the car outside my school waiting for me, and on the drives home I would talk, and he would listen. I don't know why I talked to him so much. I wasn't a particularly talkative child. A short pause. He told me once that I reminded him of his daughter. That she was going to be smarter than everyone in whatever room she walked into, and that the world was going to make her work twice as hard for half the credit, and his job was to make sure she knew she deserved the credit anyway. Zuri set her mug down. She did it carefully because her hands were doing something she didn't want them to do. He talked about me, she said, frequently. Seon-jae met her eyes. He was very proud of you. Past tense grammatically, but I mean it in every tense before Northwestern, during, what he believed you were going to do after. He didn't live to see after, but I did. The kitchen was very quiet. From the sitting room, Nyla had apparently reached a truce with the throw pillow and was now conducting a conversation with her stuffed elephant about something that required a great deal of grave consideration. The money, Zuri said finally. My scholarship funds. The grants. My father arranged them after Malcolm died. He considered it, I don't know the right word. Restitution is too legal. Obligation is too cold. He turned his mug slowly on the counter. Malcolm died protecting us. The least we could do was make sure his daughter didn't have to fight for her education alone. He died in a construction accident. Silence, Seon-jae. The scaffold collapse was real, he said carefully. The circumstances around it were not entirely accidental. The cold thing in her chest again. Sharper now. Say that again, she said. Malcolm had identified a threat to my father's organization. He was in the process of communicating what he'd found to my father when the site where he was working had an incident. The investigation ruled it accidental. My father's people looked deeper. He met her gaze and held it. They found evidence that it was arranged. They never proved it conclusively, and the man they believed was responsible died 18 months later under separate circumstances, so there was never going to be a legal resolution. Zuri was not a woman who lost her composure easily. She'd learned not to, partly from her mother, who treated emotional display as a kind of luxury, and partly from 2 years of waiting tables, while internally managing a grief and a fury and a loneliness that she couldn't afford to let surface on the floor of someone's expensive restaurant. She lost it now, not loudly, barely visibly, just a tightening around her eyes and a set to her mouth and a very particular quality of stillness that anyone who knew her would have recognized as the outermost edge. Someone killed my father, she said, each word placed with precision. We believe so, yes, and your family knew. My father knew. He handled it the way he handled everything internally, privately, with consequences that don't exist in any legal record. He paused. I was 17. I didn't know until I was 23. And then what? You sent more scholarship money and called it even. The words came out harder than she'd intended. Or maybe exactly as hard as she'd intended. She wasn't sure. Seon-jae didn't flinch. No, I tracked you. For years. You were at Northwestern, and then at Arkwright, and then you disappeared from the records I had access to, and I spent 18 months looking before I found you working 2 jobs and living in a 300-square-foot apartment. He paused. I was not going to send money this time. What were you going to do? Make sure you had options. He held her gaze. That's all I've ever wanted to do. Not control. Not ownership. Options. She looked at him for a long time. The words were right. The tone was right. The whole thing was organized and considered and landed cleanly, and that was precisely what made her not trust it completely. Because she'd sat across a table from Bennett Arkwright for 18 months, and he had also been very good at making things land cleanly. Why the executive assistant position, she said. If you just wanted to make sure I had options, why not a cash payment, or a fund, or something I don't have to show up for every day? 'Cause you would have refused the cash. You don't know that. You refused the offer in my office last night, for 30 seconds before you walked out with the folder, instead of calling me a liar. His expression was flat, but not unkind. You have your father's pride, Miss Bellamy. It's not an insult. It's an observation. She opened her mouth, closed it. He was not wrong, and the specific annoyance of a person being not wrong about you when you wanted them to be wrong filled her chest briefly and then settled. The men watching my building, she said. Tell me what you know. What he knew was considerable, and he laid it out with the methodical precision of someone who had assembled information for a living and understood how to present it so that each piece built on the last without losing the thread. Arkwright Capital's collapse had been coming for 2 years, accelerated in the last 8 months by a series of decisions that the SEC was currently examining with interest. Sterling Arkwright had brought Bennett into full operational control 18 months ago, when the older man's cardiac issues first became serious, and Bennett had managed to take what was already a shaky situation and make it demonstrably worse in ways that suggested either incompetence or willful recklessness, and possibly both. The company's creditors were circling. Several major institutional investors had already withdrawn. The flagship fund's performance had become a quiet industry scandal, quiet because no one wanted to be first to say the thing out loud, but present in every conversation where Arkwright Capital's name came up. Bennett's personal financial position, separate from the company, had also deteriorated. He'd made several leveraged real estate investments that were now underwater. He'd borrowed against equity he no longer fully had. The specific kind of financial picture that looks aggressive and sophisticated until the market stops moving in the direction you bet on, and then looks like something else entirely. His father is dying, Seon-jae said. Probably within the year. The company will not survive the transition of power in its current state. Bennett knows this, he is. A pause. The first time Seon-jae had seemed to search for a word. He is a man looking at the inventory of what he has and finding it insufficient and deciding what else might be available to him. And he decided Nyla was inventory. The flatness in Zuri's voice could have cut something. Not the child specifically, what the child represents legally. Seon-jae turned his coffee mug again. If he establishes paternity, he can't. His name isn't on the birth certificate, and he signed a document 2 years ago stating he made no paternity claim. Documents can be challenged, especially with the right legal team and sufficient motivation. He looked at her. He has not yet filed anything. What he has done is hire investigators to establish your current circumstances and document your financial situation, your living conditions, your employment stability, the specific coldness of that, the particular cruelty of it. She'd been photographed. Nyla had been photographed. All of it filed somewhere in a document that was designed to make her look like someone whose child deserved better than her. He's building a custody case, she said. He's building the materials for one. Whether he intends to file depends on how the next several months go for him financially. If the company survives, possibly not. If it collapses entirely, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Zuri pressed the heels of both hands flat against the counter and breathed. From the sitting room, Nyla had started singing something tuneless and content to the elephant, the sound of a child completely insulated from everything happening 12 feet away, and that sound was the most painful thing in the kitchen at that moment. You said you wanted to give me options, Zuri said, without looking up. What options? The ones I described last night. The apartment, the position, the protection. Here, within my security infrastructure, Bennett's investigators can't reach you. His legal team can't build a picture of financial instability if you're employed at $200,000 per year with documented childcare and housing. He paused. And I have my own interest in the Arkwright situation that I intend to pursue regardless of what you decide. But it would be easier and more effective with you inside the operation. She looked up. What does that mean, your own interest in the Arkwright situation? It means that Bennett Arkwright's family destroyed my mentor's daughter's career, and I have spent the past several weeks identifying exactly which structural weaknesses in their business would be most productive to apply pressure to. He said it with the same flat calm. He said everything. I'm not going to explain the details of that to you until you've decided whether you're willing to work with me. What I will tell you is that I intend to pursue it legally and through existing business mechanisms. No violence, no criminal exposure for you or for Nyla. Why should I believe that? You shouldn't, necessarily. Not yet. He stood up. But I'd like you to meet someone before you decide. The someone was a woman named Ji Yeon, who was waiting in an office on the second floor of the house and who turned out to be Seon-jae's legal counsel, not the corporate variety, but the kind of attorney who understood the specific geography of the line between what was legal and what was not, and had spent 15 years helping Kang Seon-jae operate on the correct side of it. Jijian was 45, South Korean-born, American-trained, and had the specific energy of a person who had stopped performing patients sometime in her 30s and hadn't missed it. She shook Zuri's hand and looked at her, the way you look at someone whose file you've already read. He told me you were sharp, Ji Yeon said. He undersold it. I haven't agreed to anything yet, Zuri said. I know. That's actually why he wanted you to meet me. Ji Yeon gestured toward a chair. I'm not here to sell you on the arrangement. I'm here so that if you do agree to it, you have independent legal counsel who is on his payroll to review every document before you sign anything. Zuri looked at Seon-jae. He was leaning against the door frame of the office with his arms folded and the expression of a man who had arranged this specifically and was now staying out of it. You brought me a lawyer, Zuri said, to protect me from you. I brought you a lawyer, he said, because I want you to make this decision with full information and proper representation. Not because I need you desperate enough to take whatever I offer. Ji Yeon produced a folder of her own, thinner than the one from last night. The proposed employment agreement, the apartment lease, and the security arrangements. The scope of the childcare arrangement. Read it. Tell me what you want changed. I'll push back on him, and we'll have a document that actually protects you. She glanced over her shoulder at Seon-jae. You can wait downstairs. He left without argument. Zuri stared at the door he'd closed behind him. Is he always like that? She said. Like what? Like I don't have a word for it. Contained, Ji Yeon offered. Yes, with exceptions. She opened the folder. The exceptions are interesting. But that's not what you're here to discuss. She tapped the first page. Let's talk about what this agreement actually obligates you to and what it doesn't. They talked for an hour. By the end of it, Zuri had crossed out 4 clauses, rewritten 2 others, added a provision about information rights that Ji Yeon negotiated down from her original language, but kept in substantially amended form, and established a clear delineation between her legitimate business work and anything touching Seon-jae's other interests. When Seon-jae came back upstairs, Ji Yeon handed him the marked-up agreement. He read it standing in the doorway. His expressions didn't change. He read every crossed-out clause and every handwritten amendment and every marginal note, and then he looked at Zuri. The information provision, he said. I want to know about threats affecting my daughter. Full disclosure timely, not edited summaries. She held his gaze. That's not negotiable. Something moved through his face. Almost approval, but not exactly. Something closer to recognition. Fine, he said. He signed it without calling anyone. That afternoon, moving out of her apartment was the part that no one would have filmed. It took 4 hours. The movers Seon-jae sent were professional and silent, and clearly accustomed to operating without attracting attention. Splitting. But there were still 4 hours of going through the specific archaeology of a life, the kitchen items that were worth keeping, and the ones that had been falling apart for a year, the boxes in the closet that hadn't been opened since she moved in, the careful sorting of what was Nyla's and what was hers, and what was neither and could go. Mrs. Okonkwo stood in the hallway of the building, with her arms crossed, and watched the movers work. Where are you going? She said. Somewhere safer, Zuri said. Safer than what? There are men in a car outside who have been photographing Nyla. She said it directly because Mrs. Okonkwo was a woman who received information straight and didn't appreciate wrappers around it. I don't want to be here anymore. Mrs. Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. Her eyes had gone somewhere cold. Those men in the Tahoe. Zuri stopped. You noticed them. I noticed them 3 weeks ago. I wrote down their plates. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her housecoat pocket. I was going to give this to you when you got home tonight. I didn't know how to tell you without. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. How long has this been happening? 6 weeks, maybe longer. Zuri took the paper. Thank you. I mean that. Mrs. Okonkwo looked at the paper in Zuri's hand, and then at the movers carrying boxes, and then at Nyla, who was sitting on her own small suitcase in the hallway supervising operations with the authority of someone, twice her height. You'll call me, Mrs. Okonkwo said. It was not a request. Every week, Zuri hugged her, which was the first time she'd done it in 8 months of living next door, and Mrs. Okonkwo hugged back with the grip of a woman who had strong opinions about how things should be. The Tahoe was gone by the time they finished loading. That bothered her more than if it had still been there. The penthouse was on the 41st floor of a building in River North that had a concierge, a security desk, and a key card system that required 2 forms of verification. The apartment itself was 3 bedrooms, which was 3 more bedrooms than Zuri currently needed, but probably the appropriate number for a person who was now on paper a senior executive assistant to Kang Seon-jae. Nyla walked through the apartment with the focused inspection of a building assessor and declared the bedroom with the window seat acceptable. Zuri stood in the living room, looking at the Chicago skyline and feeling the specific disorientation of a life that had moved faster than she'd agreed to in the past 24 hours. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Zuri. The voice was male, smooth, familiar, in a way that turned her stomach immediately. I heard you moved today. New place? Bennett Arkwright. She hadn't heard his voice in 2 years. It sounded exactly the same. That was somehow worse than if it had changed. How did you get this number? She said. We have mutual contacts. A pause with something underneath it, something that wanted to sound casual but had an edge. I've been trying to reach you for a while. I think it's time we talked. About Nyla. About your situation. Her hand had tightened on the phone to the point where she could feel her own pulse in her palm. There is nothing to discuss. I disagree. The smoothness slipping, just slightly. Things have changed, Zuri. My father's health. The company, it's a difficult time. And I've been thinking a lot about the choices I made. I'd like to make things right. You signed a document. Documents can be. He stopped himself. She heard him recalibrate. I just want to meet. Somewhere neutral. Have a conversation. No. If you contact me again without going through my attorney, I'll treat it as harassment and I will respond accordingly. She kept her voice level and empty. Don't call this number again. She hung up. She stood very still in the living room with the skyline in front of her and her heart doing something loud and uncooperative in her chest. Then she opened her contacts and called Seon-jae. He answered on the first ring this time. Bennett called me, she said. This number. Which means his people followed the move, or they had the number already, or she stopped. How did he get this number? A pause on Seon-jae's end that lasted 2 seconds. Which she was learning was a long pause for him. That number was new as of this morning, he said. The only people who have it are Ji Yeon, myself, Daniel, and the building security desk. The building security desk. She looked at the door to the apartment. Someone in your operation, she said. Another 2-second pause. Possibly, he said, and the flatness of his voice had changed quality very slightly from the flatness of contained calm to the flatness of something else entirely. Stay inside the apartment. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He was 30. He came with Ji Yeon, and a man she hadn't met before late 30s, built like someone who had made certain decisions about his body for professional reasons, introduced only as Park, who went through the apartment with a device she didn't recognize before anyone spoke another word. Park came back, said something to Zai in Korean, and Seon-jae's expression did something brief and specific that Zuri couldn't read but that Ji Yeon, who was watching the same thing, clearly could, because Ji Yeon's chin came up and her hands stilled. Tell me, Zuri said. Seon-jae looked at her. The security desk made a call this afternoon. To a number associated with a law firm that does work for Arkwright Capital. The room was very quiet. Nyla had fallen asleep in the bedroom with the window seat. Zuri could see the door from where she stood. Someone you hired gave Bennett my number, she said. Someone I hired gave Bennett information, Seon-jae said, and the careful precision of the correction told her this was worse than just the phone number. I don't yet know how much. How much what? He didn't answer immediately. Seon-jae. She said his name for the first time without the honorific, without the distance, because the distance felt absurd right now, and she needed a straight answer from a person standing 3 feet away from her. How much information? He looked at her with an expression that was, for the first time since she'd met him, something she recognized as difficulty. I don't know yet, he said, but enough that Bennett may already know you're here, which means the apartment is no longer as secure as I told you it was this morning. He paused. And enough that someone inside my organization has been reporting to him for longer than today. She absorbed that a mole, inside Seon-jae's operation, passing information to Bennett Arkwright about a woman and her daughter who were supposed to be safely hidden. She looked at Nyla's closed door. She looked at Seon-jae. I trusted you, she said, not with heat, just with weight. I know, he said. I signed that agreement this morning. I moved my daughter across the city. I told Mrs. Okonkwo we were going somewhere safer. She stopped. And within 8 hours, Bennett Arkwright called my new number. I know. He didn't look away. And I will find who did it, and I will handle it. And I am telling you that directly because the information provision in your agreement says I have to, and because you deserve to know. But right now, tonight, I need you to trust that you are still safer here than you were this morning. Because whatever Bennett has been told, he doesn't have physical access to this building, and he's not going to. She looked at him for a long time. He held the look without flinching, without performing certainty he didn't have, just waiting for her to decide. The problem was this. He was right. She was safer here. Probably. The math still worked, even with the leak factored in. But she had moved her daughter's life, her own life, everything she'd spent 2 years carefully constructing, into the hands of a man who had just told her he didn't know how compromised his own organization was. And there was no going back to the apartment. There was no going back to anything. She'd crossed the line this morning when she signed that document, and she hadn't fully understood until this moment. Standing in a 41st floor penthouse with a mole in the building and Bennett Arkwright's voice still in her ear, exactly what crossing that line meant. It meant she was in it now. All the way in, whether she'd chosen it fully or not, with a 2-year-old asleep behind a closed door and a feared Korean crime boss standing in her living room, telling her the truth in that flat, careful voice and waiting for her to decide what to do with it. She turned to Park. What do you need from me to secure this floor? She said. Park looked at Seon-jae. Seon-jae said nothing. Park looked back at Zuri. Nothing, Park said. I've already done it. She nodded. She went to Nyla's door and opened it quietly and stood there for a moment, confirming what she already knew, that her daughter was fine, that the elephant was still in her arms, that the window was locked and the room was intact, and the world had not actually ended in the past 30 minutes. It only felt like it. She closed the door. She turned back to the living room. Find out who it is, she said to Seon-jae. I intend to. And when you do, I want to know before you do anything about it. She held his gaze. That's the information provision. That applies to this. His jaw shifted slightly. Yes, he said. She crossed her arms and looked out at the skyline because she needed to look at something that wasn't him or the closed bedroom door for a minute. Then we find out together, she said. And the city held its light steady against the dark like it always did, indifferent and blazing, and below them somewhere in it, Bennett Arkwright had just gotten confirmation that Zuri Bellamy had moved, and was already, she was certain, adjusting his next move. The mole's name was David Joe. Seon-jae found out at 11:47 the following morning, and he found out the way he found out most things quietly, through channels that didn't announce themselves, from people who understood that information delivered to Kang Seon-jae was delivered once and completely, without softening. Park brought him the name in the kitchen of the penthouse, while Zuri was in the second room reviewing the employment contracts she'd been handed that morning, legitimate business documents, shipping manifests, the kind of paper trail that established her role as a real executive assistant with real responsibilities. She heard Park's voice drop and then stop, and she heard Seon-jae say nothing, and the silence had a specific texture that she'd started learning to read. She came out of the bedroom. David Cho, Seon-jae said before she could ask. He was standing at the kitchen counter with his phone face down and his hands flat on the surface, which she recognized now as the posture he assumed when something had genuinely disturbed him, and he was managing it into stillness before it became visible on his face. He runs building security for 3 of my properties, including this one. He's been with me for 6 years. She leaned against the doorframe. How long has he been feeding information to Bennett? Park believes 4 months. Seon-jae looked up, which means Bennett knew I was looking for you before I found you. Possibly before I started. She let that land. He's been ahead of this the whole time, she said. Ahead of parts of it. His jaw was tight. Not all of it. Which parts? He knew I'd located you. He knew about the employment offer before you accepted it. He likely knew the terms of the agreement. A pause. He did not know about Ji Yeon's involvement or the specific amendments you made. That conversation happened in a room I'm confident about. You're confident about a room in the same building where your security chief was on Bennett's payroll? The silence that followed was Seon-jae acknowledging, without saying it, that this was a fair point. Where is David Cho now? Zuri said. Downstairs. Downstairs as in, I haven't spoken to him yet. He turned to face her fully. I wanted to tell you first. Per the agreement. She looked at him. The agreement. He'd led with the agreement not as a technicality, but as a statement, which she noted. I want to be in the room, she said. Seon-jae was quiet for 3 seconds. That's not standard. I'm not interested in your standards right now. Someone in your organization handed my new phone number to the man who is trying to build a legal case to take my daughter, and I want to look at him when you ask him why. She held his gaze. The information provision covers this. He held the look. Then, fine. David Cho, 51, Korean-American, built like someone who had maintained a physical discipline for decades and wore it naturally rather than performatively. When Seon-jae walked into the ground floor security office with Zuri behind him, Cho was sitting in his usual chair at his usual desk, looking at his usual monitors, and his face went through 3 things in rapid succession recognition, calculation, and then something that settled into a careful neutrality that told Zuri everything she needed to know about whether he knew why they were there. He knew. Seon-jae pulled a chair to the center of the room, not behind the desk, just out in the open space, and sat down in it and looked at Cho. 6 years, Seon-jae said. Cho said nothing. 6 years I trusted you with the physical security of my buildings, my people, my family. And for 4 months of those 6 years you were passing information to Bennett Arkwright. He said it the way you state a fact you've already processed, on the other side of the emotion, rather than inside it. I want to know why. Cho's eyes moved briefly to Zuri and then back to Seon-jae. She shouldn't be here, he said. She should, Seon-jae said. She's part of why we're having this conversation. Keep going. Cho looked at the desk surface. His hands were flat on it, relaxed consciously so, she thought, the deliberate physical stillness of a trained security professional managing his own body language under observation. It started as information only, Cho said. Floor layouts, schedule patterns. Nothing about personnel. And then it became personnel. A pause. He escalated what he was asking for gradually. By the time he asked for the phone number he stopped. Already in, Seon-jae said. Already in, Cho agreed. What did he have on you? It wasn't a question. Something shifted in Cho's face. The careful neutrality cracked at one edge, very slightly, and beneath it was something that looked like shame, and underneath the shame, something older. My brother, Cho said. He borrowed money from people he shouldn't have. 3 years ago, I covered part of it and thought it was handled. He looked up. It wasn't handled. Arkwright found the creditor and bought the debt. He told me if I didn't cooperate, he'd call it in, and my brother would... He stopped again. Would what? Zuri said. Cho looked at her directly for the first time. Lose his business, lose his house, everything he has. His voice was flat and exhausted. He has 3 children. The room was quiet. Zuri looked at Cho and felt 2 things simultaneously that had no business existing in the same moment. Contempt for what he'd done, and a recognition, sharp and unwelcome, that she understood exactly how a person arrived at the choice he'd made. Not agreement, just recognition. How much does Bennett know, she said. About what we discussed, about the agreement, the plans, the specific terms of what Seon-jae intends to do with Arkwright Capital. Cho shook his head slightly. The conversation in the second-floor office, I couldn't access that one. And the conversation between the two of you last night, in this room I wasn't present for. He looked at the desk again. He knows she's here. He knows the general structure of the arrangement. He knows you're looking at his company's vulnerabilities. A pause. He doesn't know the mechanism. Seon-jae looked at Park, who had been standing near the door the entire time. Something passed between them silently. What does Bennett plan to do with what he has? Seon-jae said. He didn't tell me his plans. He asked for information and I gave it to him, and Cho's voice flattened. He has a meeting, tomorrow, with someone from the SEC investigation team. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. Zuri watched Seon-jae's hands. They didn't move. He's cooperating with the SEC, Seon-jae said. Selectively. Cho looked up. He's going to offer them something in exchange for reduced exposure on his own liability. He's going to tell them that Kang Seon-jae has been using his legitimate business network to facilitate. He stopped. Looked at Zuri. I don't know the specifics of what he's alleging. But the SEC contact he's meeting with is in the Financial Crimes Division. The words arranged themselves in Zuri's head with the precision of someone who had spent 2 years as a financial analyst. Financial Crimes Division. Bennett was going to the SEC and offering them Seon-jae in exchange for what reduced penalties on his own accounting irregularities, probably. A cooperation agreement, the specific legal transaction of a man trading someone else's exposure for his own survival. She looked at Seon-jae. His face was completely still, but his eyes had gone somewhere behind the stillness that she hadn't seen before. Is there anything to find? She said quietly. Not an accusation. A question. Direct and necessary. He looked at her. In the legitimate businesses, she said. The ones I'm working with. Is there anything in those books that an SEC investigation would? No. Flat immediate. The legitimate operations are clean. I made that decision 12 years ago, and I've maintained it because I understand how investigations work, and I have no interest in the alternative. Then Bennett is offering them a fiction. Bennett is offering them a direction, Seon-jae said. The investigation will find the businesses clean. But the investigation itself creates exposure for my other operations, and it creates a public record that associates my name with a financial crimes inquiry regardless of outcome. He paused. It's not about conviction. It's about contamination. She absorbed that, the specific sophistication of it. Bennett wasn't trying to put Seon-jae in prison. He was trying to make him radioactive to his business partners, his investors, his legitimate network. To force Seon-jae to spend the next 18 months fighting an investigation rather than dismantling the Arkwright holdings. He's buying time, she said, yes. And while you're managing an SEC inquiry, he consolidates whatever he can salvage, challenges the document you mentioned from 2 years ago, files for custody consideration based on financial instability. Seon-jae stopped. He turns your situation into a weapon. Zuri felt the full shape of it settle into place. This wasn't just Bennett protecting himself. This was a move against both of them, simultaneously, designed so that Seon-jae couldn't protect her while she was vulnerable, and she'd be too vulnerable to protect herself. It was actually well constructed, and she hated that she could see exactly how well constructed it was. She turned back to Cho. When did you find out about the SEC meeting? She said. Last night. He called me to confirm that the information I'd passed was current. The phone number, the building, the arrangement. He paused. I think he wanted to know if he glanced at Zuri. If you were settled enough that he could move forward. And you told him I was, she said. Cho's jaw tightened. I told him the move had happened and the number was active. That's all. That was enough. He didn't answer. She looked at him for a long moment and then looked at Seon-jae. Can you stop the meeting? The meeting is between Bennett and a federal investigator. I can't interfere with it without creating exactly the kind of exposure he wants me to create. He stood up. But I can make sure that whatever he offers them, what they find when they look is so completely clean that the investigations becomes an embarrassment to him. He looked at Park. I need Ji-yeon here in an hour, and I need Chen. Park left. Seon-jae looked at Cho. The silence between them had a different quality than the rest of the conversation. Longer, more personal, 6 years of it underneath. Your brother's debt, Seon-jae said. What's the number? Cho blinked. What? The outstanding debt. What is the number? It's about 400,000. Seon-jae looked at him steadily. I'll buy it. Your brother will owe me instead of whoever Bennett found, and I'll structure repayment at terms that don't destroy him. He paused. In exchange, you will provide me with a complete record of every piece of information you pass to Arkwright, every communication, every date, and you will be available to make a sworn statement if one becomes necessary. Cho stared at him. Why, he said. His voice had something unsteady in it. After what because you were squeezed and you made a bad choice and you're not the person I'm angry at. Seon-jae's voice was flat and precise. Bennett Arkwright is the person I'm angry at. He looked at Cho directly. Do you understand the difference? Cho's jaw worked. Yes, he said. Then we have an agreement. He turned toward the door. Send me the debt documentation today. Jian arrived at 12:40 with a laptop and an expression that said she'd been briefed in the car and had already begun working. Chen arrived at 1:15. He was 32, tall, had the specific combination of rumpled appearance and focused eyes that suggested someone whose brain ran considerably faster than the rest of him. And he turned out to be Seon-jae's financial analyst, the architect of the strategy against Arkwright Capital that Zuri had been told about in general terms, but hadn't yet seen in detail. They spread documents across the penthouse's dining table, and Zuri sat at the end of it and read everything they put in front of her. A sound, because reading financial documents was what she'd been trained to do, and because she was not going to sit in a corner while people made decisions about her life on the other side of a room. What Chen had built over the past 6 weeks was thorough. Arkwright Capital's flagship fund had borrowed heavily against positions that were now substantially underwater. The specific instruments involved leveraged credit default swaps on a basket of commercial real estate bonds had moved catastrophically against them when 3 major commercial property markets softened simultaneously in the previous year. The loss wasn't simply bad luck. The position sizing relative to the fund's total capital was the kind of decision that raised serious questions about fiduciary responsibility. He knew the position was too large, Zuri said, looking at the September report. Chen looked at her. What makes you say that? The September rebalancing. He moved 20% of the equity sleeve into cash 2 weeks before the position started deteriorating significantly. That's not someone who was blindsided. She turned the page. A sound at something. That's someone who knew something was wrong and protected part of the portfolio while leaving the rest of the investors in. The table went quiet. Ji Yeon looked at Chen. Chen looked at the document and then back at Zuri with an expression of recalibrated assessment. That's what the SEC is actually looking at, Ji Yeon said. Not what Bennett is trying to point them toward. That's the real exposure. Which means, Zuri said slowly, that when Bennett goes to them tomorrow and tries to redirect the investigation towards Seon-jae, he's doing it while sitting on the actual evidence of his own fraud. If the SEC investigators are competent, Ji Yeon said, and the Financial Crimes Division generally is, they will notice the pivot. They will notice that he's redirecting, and depending on how it's played. It could backfire on him completely, Seon-jae said, spitting. Standing at the window during this exchange, and he turned now, and something in his face had shifted from the controlled blankness of the morning into something that had a direction. Or they take his cooperation offer and run with it regardless, Zuri said. The investigation into you cost you 18 months, and the damage is done, whether or not they find anything. Yes, he didn't sugarcoat it. That's the real risk. She looked at the documents on the table, at the September rebalancing report, at the fund performance numbers, at the specific detailed evidence of what Bennett Arkwright had done. To the investors who trusted him with their money, including, she realized, several mid-sized pension funds whose names she recognized in the investor registry. She thought about her own termination, the specific language of it. Gross professional misconduct, violation of confidentiality protocols. A document designed to make her unemployable and simultaneously to prevent her from fighting it cleanly. She had a financial analysis degree from Northwestern. She had 18 months of experience at Arkwright Capital. She had sat in enough internal meetings during those 18 months to know things about the fund's operations that she had never been asked about and had been carefully not thinking about for 2 years because thinking about them felt like touching something that could hurt her. She put her hand flat on the table. "I need to tell you something," she said. Everyone at the table looked at her. "When I was at Arkwright Capital, I worked directly under the senior portfolio analyst for the flagship fund. For the last 4 months before my termination," she looked at Seon-jae, "I reviewed internal risk assessments. Not all of them. I was junior enough that I wasn't on the distribution list for the most sensitive materials. But enough." She paused. "Enough to know that the Risk Management Committee raised a formal concern about the position sizing in that credit default swap basket 6 weeks before my termination. And that the concern was overridden by Sterling Arkwright personally, with Bennett in the room." "Silence," she said. "I kept notes from those meetings because I was 25 years old and building good habits, and I didn't know they were going to fire me 8 weeks later. They're in a file on a personal hard drive that has been in a box in my storage unit for 2 years. She paused again. "I don't know if they're admissible in any formal sense. But they document the date, the attendees, the substance of what was discussed, and Sterling's specific instruction to proceed with the position despite the committee's objection." Ji-yeon had gone very still. "Where is the storage unit?" Ji-yeon said. "Wicker Park." Ji-yeon looked at Seon-jae. Seon-jae looked at Zuri. She held his gaze and felt the full weight of what she'd just done settle on her. She'd sat on this for 2 years. Not intentionally, she'd put those notes in a box and put the box in storage and not thought about it, because not thinking about it was how she'd survived the year after her termination. She hadn't known they were valuable. She hadn't known she was going to need them. She knew now. "This changes the shape of what we can do," Ji-yeon said carefully. "If those notes document what you're describing, and if they're intact and credible, they're not just useful. They're potentially exactly what the SEC investigation is already looking for from inside the company." "I'm not going to the SEC," Zuri said immediately. "You may not have to," Ji-yeon said. "If we can put the notes in front of the right person through the right channel in a way that arrives before Bennett meeting tomorrow." She stopped. Looked at the time. It was 2:20 p.m. "We have about 19 hours. Zuri looked at Seon-jae. Zuri looked at Seon-jae. He was watching her with that specific quality of attention that she'd first noticed in his office and that she understood now as the way he looked at something he considered genuinely significant. "You kept those notes for 2 years without knowing what they were," he said. "I kept them because I didn't know to throw them away." She pushed back from the table. "I need to go to Wicker Park." "I'll come with you," Seon-jae said. I'm aware of that." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Nyla needs to stay here with Park. She'll be fine. She's currently reorganizing my bookshelf by color." Zuri stopped. "She's doing what?" "She found the bookshelf in the study about 40 minutes ago. She seems to have strong opinions about organizational systems." Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "The bookshelf will survive. Despite everything the documents, the SEC meeting, the 19 hours, something in Zuri's chest did a thing that she chose not to examine. "Let's go," she said. The storage unit was on the 3rd floor of a facility on North Dammon, climate-controlled, accessed by a code she'd been typing in for 2 years without thinking about it. The unit itself was a 10 by 10 space that held the specific archaeology of a life-interrupted furniture she'd been unable to fit in the apartment, boxes from her Northwestern years, a set of kitchen equipment from her pre-Nyla life when she'd had counter space, and in the back left corner, a banker's box labeled AKW 2019 in her own handwriting. She pulled the box down herself. Seon-jae stood near the door and watched, and didn't offer to help, which she appreciated. She opened the box on the floor. Inside, a laptop with a cracked hinge that she'd replaced with a newer model, an external hard drive, 3 legal pads filled with her handwriting, and a manila folder of printed documents she'd forgotten she'd made copies of. She picked up the external hard drive and looked at it. 2 years. It had been sitting in this box in a climate-controlled unit in Wicker Park for 2 years while she waited tables and raised her daughter, and learned to live with the specific texture of a life that had been redirected by other people's decisions. She stood up. Seon-jae was watching her. "It's all here," she said. "Good." He paused. Zuri. He said her name the way he said most things, carefully, with intention. "What you described in the meeting. If you put those notes into any formal proceeding, even indirectly, you become visible to the people who already tried to destroy your career once." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "Bennett will know it came from you." "I know," and his response will not be measured. "I know." She tucked the hard drive under her arm. "But he already has men photographing my daughter on a playground." The measured response already happened. This is the part where I stop waiting for it to get better on its own. She moved past him toward the door, and he fell into step beside her. And neither of them said anything on the way down to the car, because there was nothing that needed saying right now. They were 40 minutes from the storage facility when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but the area code was Detroit, and something in her stomach clenched before she answered. "Zuri," a woman's voice, careful. "My name is Dr. Angela Reeves. I'm calling from Detroit Medical Center. I have you listed as an emergency contact for a patient." The world narrowed. "Who?" Zuri said. "Iris Bellamy. She was brought into the emergency department about 2 hours ago." A brief pause. "We need you to come as soon as possible." Her mother. Seon-jae saw her face change. She lowered the phone. "My mother," she said. "She's in the hospital." He was already reaching for his own phone. "I'll have the plane ready in an hour. You have a—" She stopped. Of course she had a plane. "Nyla needs to come with me." Obviously. He was already dialing. "Park will drive you both to the airport. I'll have a car meet you in Detroit. You're not—" "I have 19 hours and a financial analyst's notes that need to go through Jeon before they go anywhere near a federal investigation." He looked at her steadily. "Jeon will handle the next step. I'll handle the Arkwright documentation tonight. You go to your mother." She looked at him, at the hard drive in her hands, at the phone in her hand with the Detroit Medical Center number still on the screen. If something happens with Bennett tonight, I'll call you immediately. Every development." He met her gaze, per the agreement. She looked at the hard drive one more time, and then held it out. He took it. "I need everything on it protected," she said. "Copied, verified, documented for chain of custody. Jeon will treat it like evidence, because it is." She nodded. Her hands were steady. She noticed this about herself, that her hands stayed steady in the worst moments, which was either a strength or a sign of something she'd need to deal with later. "My mother had a cardiac event when I was in college," she said. "It came out unprompted. My father had just died, and she held it together for me and then collapsed 2 months after the funeral. She didn't tell me how serious it was until she was already out of the hospital. Her voice was flat. She does that. Holds it together until she doesn't." Seon-jae was quiet. "Your father used to say the same thing about her," he said. "He said Iris Bellamy was the strongest person he'd ever met, and also that she refused to let anyone help her carry anything." Zuri looked at him. Something cracked through her, fast and involuntary. Not grief exactly, but adjacent to it, the specific pain of a person hearing their dead parent described by someone who actually knew them. She pressed her mouth together and held it. "Get on the plane," Seon-jae said quietly. "I'll protect the evidence. You go protect your mother." She turned toward the car. She was almost at the door when her phone buzzed again. Not a call. A text from an unknown number, no area code she recognized. "You made a mistake trusting him. Ask him what happened to the man who actually arranged your father's accident. Ask him what Kang Dong-yoon did when he found out. Ask him what they covered up to protect the family name. Then ask yourself why Seon-jae never told you." She stood with the phone in her hand, and the cold thing in her chest expanded into something that filled her entirely, pressing outward against her ribs. She read it again, and again. The car was idling 3 feet away. Seon-jae was on the phone behind her, coordinating the plane. Her mother was in a hospital in Detroit. The hard drive with 2 years of evidence was in Seon-jae's hand. She looked at the text one more time, and something in her mind that had been operating on a baseline of controlled wariness since yesterday morning shifted into this terror of a person that just realized that the person they decided to. Trust may have been the most carefully constructed danger of all. She turned around. Seon-jae was ending his call. He looked at her. He saw her face. What happened, he said. She held out the phone without a word. He read it. She watched his face while he read it, looking for the thing that would tell her whether the text was a manipulation designed to destroy the only alliance she had left, or whether it was the truth that Kang Seon-jae had been keeping from her since the beginning. His expression didn't go blank. It went tight, and that the tightening, the specific compression of a man who had just been confronted with something he recognized, was the worst possible answer she could have gotten. She gave him 4 seconds. That was how long she stood with the phone between them, and watched his face do the thing it did, the tightening, the compression, the specific expression of a man confronting something he recognized, and she counted the seconds without meaning to, the way you count things when the ground shifts, and you need something concrete to hold on to. 4 seconds. Then she said, "Tell me it's a lie." Seon-jae looked up from the phone. His eyes met hers and stayed there, and he did not say it was a lie. The car was still idling. The street noise of Chicago continued around them, without caring about any of this. Somewhere behind her, a delivery truck made a reversing sound. 3 short beeps, perfectly ordinary. "Get in the car," he said. "No. Your mother is in a hospital in Detroit, and your daughter needs to." "My mother and my daughter are not a reason to stop this conversation." Her voice was completely level, which surprised her. She'd expect something else from herself. "You have about 90 seconds before I make a decision about this situation without you. Use them." He looked at her. Then he handed the phone back and said, "My father found the man responsible for the scaffold collapse 14 months after your father died. A subcontractor named Garrett Walsh, who had been paid by a competitor of my father's to arrange the accident." He paused. "My father dealt with Walsh directly. Walsh did not survive the dealing. The delivery truck finished its reversing and pulled away. And the person who paid Walsh, Zuri said, was identified. Investigated, eventually." He stopped. "Eventually what?" "The person who paid Walsh was a business associate of my father's. A man named Victor Lim, who had decided that my father's organization would be easier to absorb if my father no longer had Malcolm Bellamy watching his back." He held her gaze. "My father's response to that information was not legal. Lim lost his business, his house, and within 2 years everything he had. He died in 2014, broke, alone, of a stroke." He paused. "My father considered that proportionate. And you," she said. "When you found out at 23, what did you consider proportionate?" Something shifted in his jaw. "I considered telling you," he said. "And then I considered what telling you would mean. That your father's death was not an accident. That the man who arranged it had already been destroyed by methods that could never be acknowledged. That the legal system was never going to give you justice, because the justice had already been taken by someone else in ways that would expose my family." He paused. "I decided that you deserved the truth, and simultaneously that telling you the truth would harm you. And I held those 2 things against each other for years, and I made the wrong call." "I know that you decided for me," she said. "Yes. You decided I couldn't handle it. I decided I didn't have the right to put that weight on you." His voice had something in it, now that she hadn't heard before, not quite distress, but adjacent to it. Something strained under the flatness. "I was wrong. I understand that now, and I understood it the moment I saw that text." She took her phone back. She looked at it. She thought about her father, on a scaffold on a South Side construction site, the story she'd been given, the way her mother had received the news, the years of living with a grief that had always had an unanswered question inside it. Not a question she'd known to ask, just a quality of incompleteness that she'd mistaken for the ordinary way loss worked. It had not been ordinary. "When we get back from Detroit," she said, "you tell me everything. Not the edited version. Not what you've decided I can handle. Everything. Yes. If you hold anything else back, and I find it the way I found this, we are done. The agreement, this arrangement, all of it." She met his eyes. I'm not your obligation, and I'm not a liability you manage. If you want to actually be a person I can work with, you treat me like one." He held her gaze. "Understood," he said. She got in the car. Detroit in November had a specific quality of cold that Chicago didn't weather. The keens that settled into your clothes during the 30 seconds between a car door and a building entrance. Zuri noticed it and ignored it and moved through the hospital entrance with Nyla on her hip and the specific momentum of a woman who had already processed 3 catastrophic pieces of information before noon and had decided to postpone all of them. Detroit Medical Center's cardiac ward was on the 4th floor. A nurse named Patel, with tired eyes and competent hands, met them at the elevator and told Zuri that her mother had experienced a significant arrhythmia event, not a heart attack, she said. Someone distinguishing, with the careful between things that sounded similar and weren't serious enough that they'd admitted her for monitoring and medication adjustment. "She's awake," Patel said. "She's been asking for you." The room was a standard hospital configuration, that particular institutional light that turns everyone slightly gray, with monitors and an IV line, and Iris Bellamy, 61, propped against 2 pillows with the expression of a woman who was deeply annoyed to be in a hospital bed. Iris was the kind of beautiful that had deepened, rather than faded, strong features, silver threading through natural hair she kept short, the bearing of someone who had made certain decisions about how she occupied space and had stuck with them. She looked at Zuri coming through the door, and her expression did something complicated: relief and guilt, and the specific face of a woman who had hoped to handle this before her daughter found out. "I was going to call you," Iris said. "When?" Zuri set Nyla on the foot of the bed and pulled the chair close. "After you were discharged? After you'd been home for a week and decided I didn't need to worry." "You have enough to worry about, Mama." Iris looked at Nyla, who was examining the bed's adjustment controls with intense interest, and something in her face went soft, and then came back to its usual set. "Come here, baby girl." Nyla abandoned the controls and climbed toward her grandmother with the confidence of a child who had never been told no by this particular person. Zuri watched them and breathed. "How long has your heart been doing this?" she said. 18 months, Iris said over Nyla's head. On and off. The medication was managing it until last week. She paused. "I didn't want you to what? To know? To be involved?" Zuri kept her voice down with effort. "You're the only parent I have left." Iris looked at her. Something moved across her face. "Malcolm used to say the same thing to me. About his work. He said knowing would only worry me." She smoothed Nyla's hair with one hand. "I told him then that I deserved the chance to worry, that keeping me uninformed was not the same as keeping me safe." A pause. "I suppose I didn't take my own advice." Zuri looked at her mother's hands. Strong hands, work-worn, the hands of a woman who had raised a child alone and built a life alone and managed everything alone, because she had decided that was the safest configuration. "I know more about Dad's work than I did yesterday," Zuri said quietly. Iris went very still. Nyla was playing with the edge of the blanket, oblivious. "How much more?" Iris said. "Enough to have questions." She met her mother's eyes. "Did you know?" A long pause. "Not specifics," Iris said. "I knew there was more than the construction work." Malcolm was too. She searched for the word. Too careful. The way he moved through the world was the way of someone who was always accounting for other things. "I asked him once directly. He told me the less I knew, the safer we were." She paused. "I didn't believe him, but I loved him. So I made a choice." "The same choice he made," Zuri said. "The same choice everyone around me has been making. To decide for me what I can handle." Iris looked at her steadily. "You are the most capable person I have ever raised." "That's not the point." "No," Iris said. "It isn't." She shifted against the pillows, wincing slightly. "Who told you?" "A man named Kang Seon-jae." She watched her mother's face. "You know the name." Iris was quiet for 2 seconds. "I know the family. I never met the son." She paused. "Malcolm spoke of the father sometimes." "Never much. Just the Kang family. Like you'd say the weather. Something present and significant that you didn't argue with." The son, as Zuri stopped. What was he exactly? Her employer. Her protector. The man who had withheld a truth about her father's death for the reason that he'd decided she didn't need to carry it. He's complicated. Iris looked at her daughter with the particular attention of a woman who had raised her and knew exactly how she used certain words. Complicated how, she said. Not like that. I didn't say like what. Zuri looked at the window. Detroit's skyline was considerably smaller than Chicago's and felt honest about it. He's going to help me deal with Bennett, she said. And before you say anything, I know who Seon-jae is and what he does and the general shape of his world. I'm not naive about it, but he's the only person who has looked at my situation with full information and offered me tools instead of charity. Iris looked at Nyla. Bennett called me 3 weeks ago, she said. Zuri's head came back around. What? He said he wanted to discuss Nyla's welfare. That he was concerned about your financial stability. She said it with a flatness that matched Seon-jae's for coldness. I told him that if he called my number again, I would ensure that every person I knew understood exactly what kind of man he was, and I ended the call. You didn't tell me? You had enough? Mama. The word came out with a weight that silenced the room. I understand that everyone around me loves me enough to try to protect me from information. I need you to understand that this is the precise thing I cannot afford right now. I need every piece of information as it happens. All of it. She held her mother's gaze. Please. Iris looked at her for a long moment. All right, she said. Not easily, but completely. Thank you. Nyla, having listened to this exchange with the expression of someone following approximately 40% of it, said, Are you fighting? No, both women said simultaneously. Nyla looked between them skeptically. Your eyes were fighting, she said. Zuri's phone rang at 9:47 p.m. Detroit time. Ji-yeon. She stepped into the hallway outside her mother's room, where the corridor lights were dimmed and a night shift nurse was moving quietly at the far end. The notes held up, Ji-yeon said without preamble. Chen spent 4 hours cross-referencing them against the SEC's public filings and the internal documents we already had. The Risk Committee meeting your notes document is corroborated by 2 other sources. We have separately dated materials that independently place Sterling and Bennett at that meeting. She paused. This is not circumstantial. This is a clear record of a decision made in full knowledge of the risk, with witnesses. What does it mean, Practic? Zuri said. It means we have enough to put in front of the right person before Bennett's meeting tomorrow morning. Not the SEC directly, we can't do that cleanly without creating problems. But there is an attorney in the Financial Crimes Defense Bar who consults with the SEC's investigation team on large cases, and he owes Seon-jae a conversation. She paused. The question is whether the SEC team is willing to look at what we're providing before they sit down with Bennett tomorrow. If they do, they go into that meeting, already knowing that Bennett is trying to redirect them away from the actual fraud. And if they don't, Bennett gets his cooperation agreement, and we spend the next year fighting an investigation to Seon-jae's legitimate operations while Bennett uses the coverage to challenge your custody situation. Ji-yeon's voice was precise and unemotional about this, which Zuri appreciated. That's the scenario we're trying to prevent. What do you need from me? Nothing tonight. Sleep if you can. Seon-jae and I are handling the next 6 hours. A pause. He asked me to tell you, your mother's doctors are supposed to be good. He checked. She stood in the hallway for a moment after Ji-yeon ended the call, with the institutional quiet of the hospital around her, and the specific texture of a night that contained too many things to hold simultaneously. Her phone buzzed again. Seon-jae this time, she answered. The consultant agreed to look at the materials tonight, he said. No greeting. He'll make a recommendation to the SEC team before 8 a.m. That's the best we can do from here. Is it enough? A pause. I don't know. Probably. The materials are strong. He paused again. How is your mother stable? Irritated about being in a hospital. Refusing to eat the food. She leaned against the corridor wall. She told me Bennett called her 3 weeks ago. I know. She went very still, you know. David Cho flagged an outgoing call from a number associated with Arkwright Capital to your mother's Detroit landline 3 weeks ago. I was going to tell you. When? Her voice was quiet and had an edge under the quiet that she wasn't trying to hide. After the immediate situation with the SEC was resolved, he paused. That was the wrong call. I understand that now. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. Breathed. You're doing it again, she said. Managing what I get to know based on your judgment of what I can handle in sequence. Yes, he said it without defense. It's how I'm built. I'm aware that it's a problem. Is there anything else you're waiting to tell me at the right moment? A longer pause than usual. When I get back, she said. You and I are going to have a full accounting. Not managed. Not sequenced for impact. Everything. Her voice was steady. Say you understand. I understand, he said, and he sounded like he meant it. She was back in Chicago by noon the following day. Iris was stable, medicated, and under cardiac monitoring that her doctors wanted to maintain for 48 more hours. Zuri had arranged for a private nursing check-in through Ji Yeon, who had handled it without being asked, and had kissed her mother's forehead at 6 a.m. while Nyla was still asleep in the recliner in the corner, and told her she'd be back by the weekend. Iris had squeezed her hand and said, "He sounds like his father's son." Zuri had not asked who she was talking about. The car from the airport went directly to Seon-jae's building, not the penthouse, but the main offices on the 14th floor of a glass tower in the Loop that housed the legitimate operations of the Kang business group. She'd never been there before. The lobby required a keycard she was handed in the car, which meant they'd been planning for her to come directly here. Ji Yeon met her at the elevator. The SEC meeting happened, Ji Yeon said, moving as she spoke, the walk of someone whose morning had been running at a different speed than anyone else's. Bennett went in at 9 a.m. as scheduled. The consultation we arranged last night was received. We believe the investigation team went in with the corroborating materials already in hand. Believe. We don't have a source inside the meeting. We have a source who told us the consultation was taken seriously. She stopped at a conference room door. What we know for certain is that Bennett left the meeting in 50 minutes. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. Zuri absorbed that. 50 minutes out of a 2-hour meeting. He didn't get what he wanted, she said. We believe he did not get a cooperation agreement. Whether they told him they were looking more closely at him, directly, we don't know. Ji Yeon opened the conference room door. What happened next is what we need to discuss. Seon-jae was at the conference table with Chen and 2 other people she didn't know. He looked like a man who had not slept, which was new information every time she'd seen him before. Regardless of circumstances, he'd appeared rested. Now, there were shadows under his eyes and a tension in the line of his shoulders that his suit jacket couldn't entirely cover. He looked at her when she came in, and something in his face did the thing she'd noticed in her mother's hospital room relief, and something more complicated behind it. Sit down, he said. Bennett left the SEC meeting at 9:50 and went directly to his attorney's office. At 11:15, his attorney filed an emergency motion in Cook County Family Court. She sat. Temporary guardianship petition, Ji Yeon said, setting a document in front of her. He's arguing that you have placed Nyla in an unsafe environment by cohabitating with a known organized crime figure, and he's petitioned for an emergency hearing to establish temporary custody pending a full proceeding. The room waited. Zuri picked up the document and read the first page. She read it the way she read financial documents, fast, precise, extracting the operative language from the surrounding legalese. It took her 40 seconds. She set it down. The document I have, she said, the one he signed 2 years ago, the paternity waiver, is being challenged as signed under duress, Ji Yeon said. His claim is that you pressured him into signing by threatening to expose private communications. It's weak and probably won't survive a hearing, but it doesn't need to survive a hearing to create immediate court involvement in Nyla's living situation. He's not trying to win this petition, Zuri said. No, Ji Yeon said. He's trying to use the petition to create a record, to make it look like my living situation is under court scrutiny. She looked up, which gives his SEC story a separate track. Even if they don't pursue the financial crimes redirect, he can point to an active family court matter as evidence that there are legitimate concerns about my situation. Correct, Ji Yeon said. She looked at Seon-jae. She's watching her work through it with the specific attention of someone who had already worked through it himself and was watching her arrive at the same destination. He's using Nyla as a grenade, she said. He doesn't actually want custody. He wants the explosion. Yes, Seon-jae said, so the question is how we defuse it before it goes off. She looked at the document again. The emergency hearing when? 3 days. 3 days. She pressed her palm flat on the table and thought. The petition claims she's in an unsafe environment because she's living with you, she said to Seon-jae. Yes. Which means the argument at the hearing is about your character and your environment, not about mine. She looked up. Which means the hearing is actually about you. Something moved across his face. Zuri, if you're willing to open your legitimate business operations to a full court review, and if those operations are as clean as you've told me they are, the petition collapses. She held his gaze. Are you willing to do that? The room was very quiet. Chen looked at Ji-yeon. Ji-yeon looked at Seon-jae. Seon-jae looked at Zuri. Opening my operations to a court-directed review, even of the legitimate businesses, creates exposure for other areas that are connected through personnel and structure, even if not through money, he said. It wasn't a refusal, it was an accounting. The review would be contained legally. In practice, it would give investigators a map. I know, she said. I understood that when I said it. She held his gaze. I'm asking you anyway. He was quiet for 5 seconds. Yes, he said. She nodded. Ji-yeon was already writing. There's one more thing, Chen said. He'd been quiet for the entire exchange, looking at his laptop. Now he turned it around. This came up in the past hour. Sterling Arkwright's physician issued a press statement this morning. Sterling has been moved to hospice. The table went quiet. He's dying, Zuri said. Actively, Chen said. The statement uses language that suggests days, not weeks. She looked at the laptop screen. Sterling Arkwright was 73 in the photograph accompanying the statement. She'd met him twice during her 18 months at the company, once at an all-staff event, once in the elevator, when he'd looked at her with the specific blankness of a man who does not retain the faces of junior employees. She'd spent 2 years angry at him with an efficiency that had kept the anger clean and simple. Now he was in hospice. Bennett loses his cover when Sterling dies, she said. Everything he's been doing, the SEC's redirect, the custody petition, it's all accelerating because he knows his father's death changes the company's position entirely. The board may move to dissolve rather than continue, Chen said. There are already conversations happening. If the company dissolves and Bennett has no assets and no cooperation agreement and an active court matter related to a child he signed a paternity waiver for, he has nothing, Ji-yeon said. He becomes a man with legal exposure and no resources, which makes him more dangerous, Seon-jae said, and something in his voice sharpened. Not less. A man with nothing to lose is not a man who makes rational calculations. She looked at him. He was looking at his phone. Park just sent something, he said. His voice had changed quality in the way she'd learned to listen for. Bennett left his attorney's office 20 minutes ago, and his car went to Wicker Park, the storage facility. Her stomach dropped. He knows about the notes, she said. He knows you went to a storage facility. He may not know what you took. Seon-jae was already standing. But if David Cho reported your movement yesterday, he knows it was a storage unit on North Dammon. She was on her feet. And if he has any reason to believe I kept records from my time at Arkwright, he's there to see what's left. Seon-jae was moving to the door. He can't access your unit without the code or the manager's key, but he can pressure the manager. Yes. She was already moving alongside him, her bag on her shoulder, and the two of them came out of the conference room, with Ji-yeon already on her phone behind them, and the specific energy of a situation that had escalated in a direction no one had fully predicted. The elevator was fast and the lobby was faster, and Daniel had the car at the curb before they reached the door. They were on 90 North in 4 minutes. If he gets into that unit, she said. The hard drive is with Ji-yeon. What's left is the legal pads and the printed documents. He was on his own phone, low and rapid. Korean she didn't follow. Park on the other end. Those are copies of things we already have corroborated. He doesn't know that. No. So he goes to the unit to destroy what he thinks is the primary evidence, and we let him think he's succeeded. And he makes the next move believing the materials are gone. He looked at her. if he destroys copies while we hold the originals. He's exposed himself for nothing. She felt the shape of it. And if there's a camera in that storage facility, there are 6 cameras on the floor where your unit is, he said. Park is already contacting the facility's management. She looked at him. You put cameras on my storage unit. I put cameras in a storage facility where you had materials relevant to an active situation. Yes, he held her gaze. In my judgment, that was a reasonable security measure. You can tell me it was overreach when this is over. She looked at the road. It was overreach, she said. And right now I'm glad you did it. He said nothing. She watched the buildings go by and felt the specific compression of a situation that had narrowed to its point all the weeks of buildup. The folder and the agreement and the mole and the hospital and the text message and the SEC meeting and the court petition, all of it pointing toward this. A car on a Chicago highway and a storage park and a man who had tried to destroy her life, twice deciding to make a third attempt. Her phone buzzed. Park, she answered, and he said 3 words. He's inside it. Her jaw tightened. The manager persuaded, Park said. Just the one word. She looked at Seon-jae. He'd heard. The cameras, he said to her. Running, Park said through the phone. We have full footage from the moment he entered the building. Bennett Arkwright, on camera, accessing Zuri Bellamy's storage unit through pressure on the building manager, while an active family court petition in his name claimed she was the unfit party. She felt the pieces land. How far out are we? She said to Daniel. 8 minutes. He'll be gone in 8 minutes, she said. He doesn't need to still be there, Seon-jae said. We need the footage, not the confrontation. She understood that. She understood it completely, which did not change the specific electricity in her chest that wanted him to still be there. When they arrived, not for anything rational, not for a confrontation that would help anyone, just for the blunt satisfaction of being in the same room with the man who had signed her out of her career and out of her daughter's safety, and had spent 2 years following that up with investigators and petitions and pressure and looking at him directly. I know, she said. I know we don't need him there. Zuri. I know. She looked out the window. Drive normally, Daniel. Daniel did not quite drive normally, but the 8 minutes became 11. And when they reached storage facility, the black car she'd have attributed to Bennett on any street was gone from the parking lot, and the facility manager was standing inside the entrance, looking like a man who had just made an expensive mistake. Park was already inside. The footage was intact. She went up to the 3rd floor anyway. She went to her unit. The door had been accessed. The manager had a master code, and the door showed it in the electronic log. Inside, the unit was as she'd left it. Mostly, the legal pads were gone. The manila folder of printed documents was gone. Scattered on the floor, the box she'd carried them in, a pen that had fallen out, and one single page of her own handwriting, a sheet that had slipped between the box and the floor and been missed. She picked it up. It was her notes from the Risk Committee meeting. September 12th, 2019. Attendees listed in her handwriting, slightly cramped the way it always was when she was taking notes fast, with a margin note in a different pen that she'd apparently added later. Sterling said the position stays. Direct quote. Bennett nodded. No one else spoke. She stood in the storage unit, holding the one page Bennett hadn't found. Then she took out her phone and photographed it. Front back, the margin note in close-up. She sent it to GN with 3 words, frame this one. She turned around. Seon-jae was in the doorway. He'd followed her up without her noticing, which was something she was going to have to think about later, that she'd stopped registering his presence as an intrusion and started registering it as context. We have the footage, he said. I know. Ji-yeon is coordinating with our family court attorney. The petition hearing in 3 days between the footage of an illegal access and the materials we already have. There is a strong argument for a counter-motion that 3 days, she said. Yes. She looked at the empty floor where the box had been. Bennett is going to hear from his attorney that the unit was on camera, she said. When does he realize he's handed us something? When his attorney figures it out. Could be hours. Could be tomorrow morning. He paused. When he realizes, he'll move fast. He doesn't have the time to be methodical anymore. He's going to do something that doesn't look like a calculation, she said. He's going to do something that looks like a man who's out of moves. Yes. Something in his voice told her he'd already been thinking about what that looked like. That's what I'm preparing for. She walked toward the door. He stepped aside to let her pass. She stopped next to him in the doorway, close enough that the space between them was neither comfortable nor accidental. The full accounting, she said. Tonight. Everything you've been waiting for the right moment to tell me. He met her eyes. Tonight, he said. She moved past him and down the corridor, and the fluorescent lights of the storage facility made everything flat and honest, and she walked through them with the page in her hand, and the footage and a camera, and 3 days until a hearing and the knowledge that somewhere in this city, Bennett Arkwright was currently being told by his attorney that the room he'd just broken into had been watching him the entire time. She wanted to feel satisfied about that. She did feel satisfied about that. She also felt the thing she'd been feeling since the storage unit door opened and showed her the empty floor where her father's professional history and her own carefully kept notes had been sitting for 2 years, a specific fury that had nothing clean about it, that was not strategic or useful or directed anywhere productive. That was simply the anger of a woman who had been underestimated by the same man 3 times and was now at the point where she was done being something that happened to. She pushed through the facility's front door into the November cold. She did not wait for anyone to open the car. She opened it herself, got in, and looked straight ahead while Daniel started the engine. And Park came out of the building with his phone at his ear, and Kang Seon-jae came last. And reading something on his own phone with an expression that had gone back to the controlled blankness he wore when something required it. He got in beside her. What? She said. He showed her his phone. A text from a number she didn't recognize sent to him, not her, 4 words. We need to meet. And below it, the contact name Seon-jae had apparently saved at some point for a number he'd been monitoring. B. Arkwright. The car pulled out into traffic. Zuri looked at the text, and then at Seon-jae, and felt the whole situation tighten around its center, the way a knot does right before it either cinches completely or comes apart. And she understood with complete clarity that the next move was the one that would determine which it was. Seon-jae did not respond to the text. He sat with it on the screen for the length of the drive back to the loop, and he did not respond. And Zuri did not tell him to. And the car moved through Chicago's midday traffic with that specific text sitting between them like an object placed on a table that neither of them was ready to pick up yet. She was the one who finally said it. You're going to meet him. Yes. Not alone, he looked at her. Zuri, that is not a negotiable point. She held his gaze. Whatever he wants to say, I have the right to hear it directly. Everything that's happened, the petition, the storage unit, my career, my father, all of it connects to that man. I am not waiting in a room somewhere while you handle it. She paused. And frankly, you having a private meeting with Bennett Arkwright 3 days before a court hearing looks considerably worse than the 2 of us meeting him together. He thought about that. Ji-yeon needs to be present, he said. Agreed. And we choose the location, agreed. He picked up the phone. Bennett Arkwright chose the Langham's lobby bar, which told Zuri something about where he thought this meeting, Fitz meeting, was going, somewhere public, well-lit, the kind of place where scenes don't happen because the hotel doesn't permit them and the clientele is too composed to participate. A controlled environment. His idea of neutral ground. Seon-jae sent back a different address, a conference room in the Kang Group's Loop offices with a court reporter present, because Ji-yeon had insisted and Seon-jae had not argued. Bennett had accepted after 45 minutes of silence. That silence told Zuri something too. A man with leverage accepts immediately or counters with another location. A sound who is running out of road accepts after 45 minutes because he's calculating whether the thing he's about to ask for is worth the conditions. He arrived at 4 p.m. She'd seen photographs of Bennett Arkwright in the financial press, the kind of photographs that accompany profiles of men who have inherited significant wealth and are being positioned as the next generation of something. He'd been good-looking in those photographs in the uncomplicated way of someone who had excellent nutrition and access to quality tailoring from a young age. Was still good-looking in the conference room, but the photographs hadn't been recent, and the 18 months since the fund's collapse had done something to the bones of his face. Not aged him exactly, but pressured him. The way weather pressures a structure, finding the places where the material is weaker than it appears. He was 34. He looked closer to 42. He came in with his attorney, a thin man named Graves, who had the energy of someone billing by the minute and aware of it. He stopped when he saw the court reporter at the small desk in the corner. "That wasn't discussed," Graves said. "It's our room," Ji Yeon said. "The reporter stays, or the meeting doesn't happen." Graves looked at Bennett. Bennett looked at Zuri. She had not seen him in 2 years and 4 months. He looked at her, the way people look at things they've caused damage to, not with guilt, exactly, but with a specific kind of attention that acknowledges the damage is there without quite taking responsibility for its existence. His eyes moved to the chair beside her, where Seon-jae was sitting, and something tightened in his jaw. "Fine," Bennett said. They sat. Ji-yeon had positioned herself at the corner of the table where she could see everyone and be seen by no one as a primary party, a deliberate geometry. The court reporter had her machine and her stillness. The room had the kind of air conditioning that exists only in professional spaces, constant and slightly too cold. Bennett's attorney opened a leather portfolio. Seon-jae said, "You contacted me." "Talk." Bennett looked at Graves. Something passed between them. Then Bennett said, "I want to discuss a resolution." "To which of the several things you've initiated?" Zuri said. He looked at her, "All of them." "The custody petition," she said. "Among other things." "Say it directly." He breathed in through his nose. A contained breath, the breath of someone managing something. "I want to withdraw the petition. The SEC matter, the all of it." "I want to stop." He paused, "and I need something in exchange." Silence. "Go ahead," Seon-jae said. "The materials you have," Bennett said. "The notes from the risk committee meeting. Whatever else your analyst has been compiling about the fund's position." He kept his eyes on Seon-jae, which she noticed and filed. He was conducting this negotiation to Seon-jae, not to her, which meant he still believed she was the secondary party in this room. "I need those materials not to reach the SEC," Ji Yeon said carefully. "The SEC investigation is already in progress independently of any materials we hold." "But the materials would accelerate it," Bennett said. Significantly, he looked at the table surface. "My father is dying. He'll be gone within the week. The company is there's nothing left to save." "I know that. I'm not asking you to save anything." He paused. "I'm asking you to let me bury him without a federal investigation running simultaneously." The room was very quiet. Zuri looked at Bennett Arkwright. Really looked at him, with the full attention she'd been rationing since he walked in, and what she saw surprised her in a way she resented. He was afraid. Not performing fear. Actually afraid. The kind that lives in the chest and changes the quality of a person's breathing, and underneath the fear something that looked, unexpectedly, like grief. Sterling Arkwright had tried to destroy her, had succeeded, for 2 years, in destroying the version of her life she'd been building. He had looked at his son's pregnant girlfriend as a problem to be managed, and had managed her accordingly, with no more consideration than you give to a quarterly loss you write off and move on from. And now he was dying in a hospital somewhere in this city, while his son sat in a conference room trying to find a way to get through the next week without additional catastrophe. She thought about her mother in Detroit Medical Center. She looked at Bennett. "The petition," she said. "You withdraw it today." Filed and withdrawn, on the record, with a statement that the claims were not substantiated. He looked at her directly for the first time. That's the condition," she said. "Not tomorrow, not after your father's funeral. Today, before 5 p.m., Ji Yeon will draft the withdrawal language, and your attorney will file it." Graves looked at Bennett. "And the SEC materials," Bennett said, "are not yours to negotiate for?" Zuri said. "Those materials document a decision that harmed other people. Not me, the investors in that fund. The pension managers. The people whose retirement accounts were in positions your father and you decided to maintain past the point of reasonable risk." Her voice was even. Not heated, just precise. "I can't speak to what the SEC does with their investigation. I won't suppress evidence of harm to people who have nothing to do with any of this. Bennett's jaw tightened. Then what am I getting? He said. You're getting the petition withdrawn, without a countersuit, she said. Jia Yin has grounds for a significant countersuit based on the footage from the storage facility this morning. We're choosing not to file it in exchange for a clean withdrawal and a commitment to have no further contact with me or my daughter. She paused. That's the deal. It's complete. There's nothing else. Graves was writing. Bennett looked at the table. The document I signed 2 years ago, he said. His voice had dropped. The paternity waiver stands, she said. No, the word came out flat and final. She isn't. You made that decision before she was born, and you confirmed it when you sent investigators to photograph her a playground own instead of picking up a phone. She held his gaze. Nyla is my daughter. She has everything she needs, and she doesn't need you to provide it. What she needs is for you to be absent in a way that is legally documented and permanent. He looked at her for a long time. The grief she'd seen when he came in had moved closer to the surface. She could see it more clearly now, not grief about Nyla specifically. She didn't think. Or not only that. Grief about everything. About the shape of a life that had seemed inevitable and had turned out not to be. About a father dying in a way that closed a door you didn't realize you'd been keeping open until it shut. She understood grief. She'd lived in it for 8 years after her own father died. She didn't say any of that. Your father tried to end my career, she said instead quietly. He succeeded for 2 years. And I've spent those 2 years building something that he and you don't get to take credit for and don't get to touch. She paused. I'm not going to pretend what your family did to me was minor. But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life organized around what you did. That's not the same as forgiveness. It's just a choice about what I'm going to carry. Bennett looked at the table. Then he looked at his attorney. Draft the withdrawal, he said. They filed it at 4:47 p.m. Ji-yeon confirmed receipt at 4:52 and sent Zuri a text that contained only the case number and a single word, done. Zuri was standing at the window of the conference rooms when the text came in. The loop's late afternoon traffic was doing what it always did, the specific organized chaos of a city managing itself, and the light had gone that particular November gold that Chicago produced for. About 40 minutes before it gave up and went gray. She heard the room empty behind her. Graves and Bennett leaving. Ji-yeon on a call. The court reporter packing her machine. She heard Seon-jae stay. After a while she said, You didn't say anything in there. You didn't need me to, he said. She turned around. He was still in the same chair, jacket on, hands loose on the table, watching her with the full attention that she'd stopped registering as unsettling, and now just registered as him. The full accounting, she said. You promised me tonight. Yes. Then let's go. They went to the penthouse. A sound like green wood splitting. Not because it felt like home yet, it didn't. It would take longer than a week for anything to feel like home. But because Nyla was there with Park, and Nyla needed dinner and a bath, and the stuffed elephant located from wherever she'd left it, and all of those things were more important than the geography of the conversation. Nyla had, in fact, reorganized the bookshelf in the study by color, which turned out to be a significant improvement over the original arrangement. She reported this to Zuri upon arrival with the pride of someone who has completed a challenging project under difficult conditions, and Zuri told her it was excellent work, and Nyla accepted this and moved on to the dinner negotiation. After dinner, after the bath, after the elephant was found under the bathroom sink, which was not where it lived, but was apparently where it had chosen to spend the afternoon. After Nyla was in the bed with the window seat and asleep with the completeness that only children achieved. Then Zuri came out to the living room where Seon-jae was sitting with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who had been organizing what he needed to say. She sat down across from him, not beside him, across with the coffee between them, because this was a conversation that needed a table, and she didn't have one out here, so she was improvising with distance. Start at the beginning, she said. Not your beginning. My father's. He started at the beginning. He talked for a long time. Some of it she'd read in the folder. Most of it went further. Malcolm Bellamy arriving in the Kang household as a driver and becoming something else, not through ambition, but through the specific quality of his character, the steadiness of him, the directness, the way he occupied a room without performing his occupation of it. Seon-jae's father recognizing something in him that he trusted more than most things he'd built from money. The years of it. He told her about the year his mother died, and he told it the way people tell things they don't tell easily, with pauses in the wrong places and sentences that started one direction and arrived somewhere adjacent, and she listened without filling the pauses. Malcolm sitting in agreement in parking Evanston and teaching a 14-year-old to parallel park at 2 in the morning because the boy had decided he needed to learn and Seon-jae's father was not available and Malcolm had a half hour between his last task of the evening and his first task of the morning and had simply said, "Get in, I'll show you." He wasn't supposed to be there that night, Seon-jae said. His shift ended at 10. He was covering for someone. He looked at his coffee. He used to do that. Cover for people, not because it was required, because it was the kind of person he was. Zuri pressed her thumb against the edge of her mug. "Tell me about the accident," she said. He did. He told it with the same flatness he used for most difficult things, but she could hear what was underneath it, the specific sound of someone who had carried information for a long time and was now setting it down in front of another person and feeling the weight change hands. Victor Lim. The motivation, not personal animosity toward Malcolm, just the cold calculation that removing Kang Dong-hyun's most trusted person would weaken the organization enough to absorb. The scaffold. The investigation that found accident and stopped there because accidents were easier than alternatives. Kang Dong-hyun, finding out 14 months later. The specific consequences that followed, which Seon-jae described in the language of outcomes rather than actions, and which Zuri understood completely, and which she sat with for a moment before she asked the next question. "The cover story," she said. "The construction accident. Your family told my mother it was a straightforward accident." Yes. They let her grieve something that wasn't true. The true thing would have put her in contact with a world that couldn't protect her, he said. That was the reasoning. Whose reasoning? My father's. He held her gaze. I wasn't involved in that decision. I was 17, and I didn't know any of this until I was 23. He paused. But I've carried it since then. Yes. The decision was made by my father, and it wasn't mine to undo unilaterally, and then my father was gone, and then it became a question of what telling you served versus what it cost. You decided it cost more than it served. I decided wrong. She looked at him. He looked back. The man who paid Lim to arrange it, she said. Dead. Yes, 2007, separate circumstances. His voice was flat. I investigated it when I found out. He died of a genuine cardiac event. No involvement from my father's people. He'd already been reduced to nothing by then and wasn't considered a remaining concern. And Lim lost everything over a period of 2 years and died in 2014. My father was deliberate about it, methodical. He paused. I'm not going to tell you it was justice. It wasn't. It was my father's version of accounting. Was it enough for you? A pause. No, he said. It wasn't something I could hold on to. Justice means something you can explain to the person who lost the most. My father's accounting couldn't be explained. It had to stay buried. He looked at her steadily. You were the person who lost the most. I couldn't tell you anything. And so it was never enough. The room was quiet. The Chicago skyline through the window was doing what it always did, holding its lights up against the dark without asking for anything in return. My mother doesn't know the full truth, Zuri said. What happened to him? No, I have to tell her. Yes, he didn't equivocate. She deserves to know. She's going to be, she stopped. Looked for the word. She's going to be devastated, and then furious, and then devastated again. That's how she processes things in waves. She paused. And she's going to want to know why no one told her before. I know. And I'm going to have to find an answer for that isn't, because everyone decided for you. There isn't another answer, he said. Accurate answers and comfortable answers aren't always the same thing. She looked at him. Is there anything else? She said. Anything you've been holding back that I'm going to find out some other way. He was quiet for 4 seconds, long by his standards. My father's organization, he said. The non-legitimate operations. They are winding down. Have been for 3 years. When my father died, I made the decision to exit those operations over a period of 5 to 7 years in a way that didn't destabilize the people dependent on them or create exposure for anyone who worked inside them in good faith. He met her eyes. I'm 4 years in. I don't know if you'll still be working with me by the time the last piece of it is done, but I want you to know it's the direction. She absorbed that. Why, she said, why wind it down? Because it's what my father built and not what I chose. He said it without drama. I spent 15 years running something I inherited and 2 years making a decision about whether I wanted to keep running it. I decided I didn't. He paused. I'm telling you this not as a virtue claim. I'm telling you because you asked if there's anything else. She nodded slowly. That's everything. That's genuinely everything. Yes. She sat with it, all of it together. Her father's real work, his death, the funding of her education, the years of Seon-jae tracking her from a distance, David Cho and Bennett, and the SEC and the petition. All the moving parts that had been running simultaneously, some of them for 8 years, most of them unknown to her, all of them arriving together in the span of a single week that felt like it had happened to a different person from the one who'd fainted between tables 11 and 12 at Sarin on a Friday night. She was not the same person. She'd been changing for 2 years, working in a restaurant kitchen, raising a child on the margin of what was possible, learning to operate without the professional identity that had been the axis of her selfhood since college. She'd thought of that period as a regression, a falling backward from what she'd been building. It hadn't been a regression. It had been something else, something she didn't have a clean word for, a compression, maybe. The kind that makes material denser and more durable. She'd survived 2 years of being underestimated and underpaid and overtired and alone, and she'd kept her daughter fed and safe and happy enough that Nyla had grown into a child who reorganized bookshelves and told Korean crime bosses their eyes were sad and slept with total trust in a new bed, in a city that was learning to make room for them. She'd done that. Not Seon-jae, not Malcolm's legacy. Not the money that had funded her education or the protection that had covered her in the past week. She had done that. I'm not leaving the position, she said. Seon-jae, who had been sitting with the patience of someone who was not going to push this particular question, looked at her. The agreement stands, she said. The work is real, and I'm good at it, and I want to keep doing it. She paused. But I need you to understand something. The reason my father mattered to you, the reason you came looking for me, I understand it. I don't diminish it. But I'm not here because of him anymore. I'm here because of what I decided when Ji-yeon put those documents in front of me, and I read them with my own eyes. She held his gaze. The debt between our families is paid. I'm saying that directly. Whatever you believed you owed Malcolm, it's done. What happens from here isn't about that. He looked at her for a long moment. What is it about, he said. That's a question that has time, she said. We don't have to answer it tonight. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not quite, but a release of something that had been held, the specific quality of a person who has been braced against a verdict and received something other than what they'd prepared for. Your mother, he said. She's coming to Chicago when she's discharged. Zuri blinked. You didn't ask. I arranged it anyway. He met her look. I know, overreach. He paused. She shouldn't be alone in Detroit while she's adjusting medications. I've arranged for the second bedroom here, and a cardiac nurse who will come 3 mornings a week and check her vitals and make sure she's taking what she's supposed to take. He paused again. If she refuses, she refuses. But the arrangement is available. She looked at him. She thought about what she'd said to him earlier in the week, about managing her life, about deciding for her, about the specific kind of help that wrapped itself in good intentions and still amounted to control. This was different. Not because the impulse was different. She could see the impulse was identical, the same instinct toward management and provision. But because he was telling her. He was offering it as information rather than a decision already made, with the room to refuse built into how he delivered it. He was learning. I'll ask her, Zuri said. He nodded. She'll say yes, he added. She won't want to, but she'll say yes. You've never met my mother. No. But she sent her daughter to Northwestern and watched her go work for the company that fired her without falling apart. And when a man she didn't know called to talk about her granddaughter, she told him off on the first ring. He paused. She's practical. Coming to Chicago is practical. Zuri looked at the skyline. You're not wrong, she said. Sterling Arkwright died 5 days later, on a Tuesday morning, with his son present in the room. Zuri read the death notice in the Tribune's digital edition over coffee, while Nyla was having an extended negotiation with Seon-jae in the other room about whether the stuffed elephant could attend the breakfast table and in what capacity. She read it twice, and then set her phone down and looked at the window. She felt less than she'd expected to feel. Not nothing, but less. The anger that had organized itself around the Arkwright name for 2 years had been running on a different fuel for the past week. Not grief anymore, but action. And the action had resolved, and what was left was something quieter and less structured. The news of Sterling's death landed, and she acknowledged it, and that was most of what it was. She thought about her father for a while, not the version she'd carried for 8 years, the construction supervisor, the man in the hard hat, the official story. The fuller version. The man who sat in a parking lot in Evanston at 2 a.m. teaching a grieving teenager to parallel park because the boy needed it and someone needed to be present, and Malcolm Bellamy had 20 minutes and the decision was automatic. That man. I'll talk about his daughter to a kid who wasn't his, and told him she was going to be smarter than every room she walked into, and that his job was to make sure she knew she deserved to be there. She'd walked into a lot of rooms in the past week. She deserved to be in all of them. The elephant, Seon-jae said from the doorway, has been permitted to attend breakfast, but cannot occupy its own chair because that is a structural limitation of the seating arrangement. This was accepted as a reasonable compromise. Zuri looked up from her coffee. Was there genuinely a negotiation? There was. It lasted 6 minutes. She opened with the position that the elephant required its own chair and a plate. He paused. We settled at elephant on the table edge, no plate, full conversational participation. She looked at him. He was in the doorway in a dress shirt without the jacket, which she'd started to notice was his version of casual, not the full armor of the suit, but not relaxed either, just a different register of the same containment. He was holding his own coffee and looking at her with the attention that she'd stopped cataloging as a specific quality and had started just accepting as the way he looked at her. Sterling died, she said. He nodded. I saw. Bennett is going to call. His attorney will call GAN. That's the only channel now. He paused. He requested permission to attend the funeral. It's in the restriction language. Any contact requires your consent. She'd written that language herself, with GAN, in the amended agreement. She'd put it in because GAN had told her to, and she'd understood why. She hadn't expected to be using it this soon. She thought about what she'd said to Bennett in the conference room. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life organized around what you did. She'd meant it when she said it. She meant it now. Tell Jiyeon yes, she said. Funeral only, no access to me or Nyla. Standard restrictions maintained. Seon-jae looked at her. You're sure? The man is burying his father. She picked up her coffee. I know what that costs. I'm not going to add to it. She paused. That's not forgiveness. It's just not being the kind of person who kicks someone when they're at their lowest, even if they deserved something worse. He nodded. He didn't say anything about the decision. He didn't. She noticed looked surprised by it. 3 months later, the SEC issued a formal notice of investigation into Arkwright Capital's fund management practices, citing concerns about fiduciary responsibility and risk disclosure. The notice named Sterling Arkwright's estate as the primary respondent. It named Bennett as a material witness. It did not name Kang Seon-jae. Jiyeon sent Zuri the press release at 7:40 in the morning with a note that said, per your instruction, our materials were provided through counsel and are now part of the official record. Your notes are attributed to an anonymous former employee. No direct exposure to you. Zuri read it at her desk on the 14th floor of the Kang Group's Loop offices, where she had spent the past 3 months doing work that she was genuinely good at and that mattered in ways that the restaurant work hadn't. She'd restructured the reporting structure between three subsidiaries, identified a significant inefficiency in the shipping logistics operation that had saved money she found satisfying to calculate, and had become, in the specific estimation of the 6 department heads she interacted with, regularly, the person you went to when Seon-jae was unavailable and the thing could not wait. She had an office now. It had a view that was not as good as Seon-jae's, but was considerably better than nothing. She read Ji-yeon's note and typed back, "Thank you." Plus said so. Ji-yeon had a junior associate named Priya who had done most of the technical work on the materials submission. Zuri had made a point of knowing her name. She put her phone down and looked out the window at the lake, which was doing what the lake always did, existing at a scale that made everything else seem appropriately sized. Her mother was in the second bedroom of the penthouse, reading something on a tablet and complaining 3 mornings a week to the cardiac nurse about the medication schedule, in a way that the nurse had told Zuri was actually a sign that her mother was feeling well enough to have opinions. Nyla had started preschool at a place 3 blocks from the building that had a playground with equipment she had strong views about, and a teacher named Ms. Farida, who Nyla had decided was a personal ally in most situations. The world was not fixed. The world was not smooth or resolved, or any of the things that stories implied when they reached their endings. Things that weren't right. Bennett Arkwright existed and would continue to exist, and the pension fund investors who'd lost money would not get all of it back. And Iris Bellamy had received her daughter's account of Malcolm's actual death, with the waves of devastation and fury Zuri had predicted, and the processing of that was ongoing and would be for a long time. Seon-jae. Jae's organization was still what it was, winding down at the pace it was winding down, which was slower than Zuri would have preferred and faster than some of the people inside it would have preferred. And the negotiation of that timeline was something she didn't have standing in, and understood she didn't have standing in and was learning to sit with. None of that was clean. She'd stopped looking for clean. On a Friday evening in late February, Seon-jae appeared in the doorway of her office at 6:15 p.m. and said, "There's a charity gala in 2 weeks. The Children's Research Foundation. I attend every year." She looked up from what she was reading. "I know. I made the reservation. I want you to come with me." He paused. "Not in your capacity as executive assistant." As he stopped, he was not a man who lost words easily, and the interruption was noticeable. "As the person I want beside me in that room." She looked at him. A Souts. He stood in the doorway, with his hands in his pockets, and his expression doing the thing it had started, doing more frequently over the past 3 months, not the controlled blankness she'd first seen in his office. Above serene, but something that let more through. Something feachy different. Something that looked more like the man Nyla had looked at on the first and said, "Your eyes are sad." Except the sadness had been doing something different lately. Going somewhere different. "You've spent your whole life not letting people see what you care about," she said. "Yes. And you want to walk into a room in front of your entire business network with me beside you." "Yes. That's going to generate a significant amount of attention." "I'm aware." She sat back in her chair. "Why now? Why not 6 months from now? Or a year from now, when things are more settled?" "Because things are not going to be more settled," he said. "There will always be something unsettled. That's not a reason to keep hiding the things that matter." He paused. "I spent 14 years not hiding the things I was afraid to lose because I didn't have anything to lose. This is different." He held her gaze. "You're different." She looked at him. She thought about the night she'd read the folder, the morning she'd signed the amended agreement, the storage unit and the conference room, and the hospital in Detroit, and the text message in the parking lot, and the long conversation on the couch with 2 cups of coffee and a sleeping child behind a closed door. None of it had been clean. None of it had arrived the way things were supposed to arrive. Her father had died, protecting a family she hadn't known existed. That family had funded her education. The son of that family had spent years tracking her from a distance, and then walked into the restaurant where she was a waitress and offered her a way out of the corner she'd been backed into. And he had done it badly, and with too many withheld truths, and with a proprietary instinct toward management that he was actively working on, and she had negotiated every term of her own agreement, and brought her own lawyer, and crossed out 4 clauses, and rewritten 2 more, and built the version of this arrangement that she could actually live inside. That was not a small thing. The woman who had read that termination letter over a sink full of dishes 2 years ago had not been capable of building that. She'd been capable of surviving, which was its own kind of strength, but not this. This had required everything that had come after the 2 years of it, the pushing through, the specific knowledge of exactly what she was capable of, that you could only get from doing it without any certainty that it would work. Yes, she said. Something in Seon-jae's face opened. Not dramatically, just a fraction, a slight yielding of the containment, the specific expression of a person who had prepared for a different answer. She stood up and picked up her bag. 2 weeks. I'll need something to wear. I'll find something myself. She came toward the door. You can come with me to look if you want. He blinked. Shopping. She stopped beside him in the doorway. They were close, the doorway required it. You spend a significant amount of time arranging things for me. I thought you might benefit from the experience of standing in a store having opinions about fabric while someone else makes the decision. He looked at her for a moment. That sounds like a form of accountability, he said. It is, she said. And for the first time since she'd known him, since his office, a sauce above Serene, since the parking lot in Wicker Park, since the conference room and the kitchen with coffee, and all the hard conversations in between, Kang Seon-jae smiled. Not the neighborhood of a smile she'd seen before. An actual smile, arriving unmanaged and slightly uneven on one side, the smile of someone who had stopped performing composure for approximately 4 seconds and was experiencing the strange relief of it. She walked past him into the hallway. He fell into step beside her. The penthouse that evening had the specific warmth of a place that is becoming something, still in progress, not finished, but pointed in a direction. Iris was at the kitchen counter when they came in, assembled in the way she assembled herself, upright, with composed, the quality of a woman who had spent 61 years developing an opinion about how you occupied a room. She looked at Seon-jae the way she'd looked at him every evening for the past 2 months, which was the way you look at something you decided about, but are giving additional time to confirm. She handed him a glass of water. It was a small thing. It was the thing she did for people she'd decided were inside the boundary. Zuri noticed it and said nothing about it. Nyla was in the living room with a drawing spread across the coffee table and an expression of great concentration. She had recently become interested in drawing maps, not of real places, of invented ones with names she made up, and geographical features that included mountains she called puffies and rivers she called bigs. Seon-jae sat down on the floor beside her. This was something he'd started doing in the second week, and had continued without comment, just lowering himself to the floor. When Nyla was on it, because she was more likely to show him things when he was at her level, and he had apparently decided being shown things by a 2-year-old was worth the adjustment to his usual posture. This one, Nyla said, pointing at a purple blob in the upper left of the drawing, is where the puffies live. The puffies, he said, the mountains. They're puffies. She pointed at a blue line that curved dramatically across the page. This is the big. You can't cross it without a boat. What kind of boat? She considered this, a red one. Red specifically. The blue ones sink. She said it with the confidence of someone who had done the research. Don't ask me why. They just do. He looked at the map seriously, the way he looked at everything. What's on the other side of the big? Nyla picked up a purple crayon and drew something. A house, she said. It's where the family lives. Whose family? She looked at him. She had her mother's eyes, the specific quality of Zuri's gaze, the directness of it, the sense of someone taking accurate measure. It was startling sometimes in the small face. Our family, Nyla said, with the simplicity of a person to whom this was obvious information she was generously sharing with someone slower on the uptake. Seon-jae looked at the house she'd drawn. It was a square with a triangle on top, and 2 windows and a door in a yard that contained what appeared to be a tree and possibly a dinosaur, the distinction being unclear at this scale. He was quiet for a moment. Zuri from the kitchen doorway watched him be quiet. She watched him pick up a brown crayon and hold it out to Nyla and say, "Can I add a door?" Nyla looked at the existing door and then at him. There's already a door, she said. A better door. She thought about this. How much better? Considerably. Nyla deliberated with the seriousness of someone evaluating a contract. Okay, she said, but don't make it too big. It doesn't need to be a big door. It'll be exactly the right size, he said. Zuri turned back to the kitchen, where her mother was finishing something on the stove, and she stood beside Iris and looked at the pot and did not look back at the living room. For a moment, just listened to Nyla explaining the architectural requirements of the door, while Seon-jae asked clarifying questions that Nyla answered with patience. Iris said, without looking up from the stove, "He's good with her." "Yes, your father would have," she stopped. It had been 2 months since Zuri had told her the truth about Malcolm's death, and Iris was still finding the edges of it, still discovering which sentences she could finish and which ones she couldn't yet. He would have recognized something in him. Zuri looked at the pot. "I think so too," she said. They stood together in the kitchen, while the light went down out since the city got on with being itself, and the sound from the living room was a child giving detailed instructions about map cartography to a man who was very carefully drawing the right-size door. Malcolm Bellamy had spent 15 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, and had died for it, and had never been given credit for the full shape of what he'd done. The story told about him was smaller than the truth. Zuri intended to know the full truth. Zuri intended to carry it fully, not because it was comfortable, but because it was real, and she had learned in the past 3 months that carrying real things, even the heavy ones, was preferable to carrying the shaped versions of them that other people found easier to hand you. She had also learned, was still learning, in the incremental, non-linear way that the actually important things are learned, that accepting help was not the same as surrendering the axis of yourself. That people who brought you tools were not automatically people who wanted to own you. That you could negotiate the terms of every arrangement you entered and still trust the person across the table. That trust rebuilt differently after it had been tested. Slower, more deliberate, less like a door swinging open and more like a door that you tried the weight of first each time before you committed to walking through. She was walking through slowly. That was fine. There was time. Outside, the lake was dark and very large, and entirely indifferent to any of it, the city and the building and the family inside it. The $5 million trust in Nyla's name that Zuri had finally accepted on the condition that it was structured as an educational fund controlled by Nyla herself at 18, not by anyone else on her behalf. The map on the coffee table, with its puffies and its bigs and its house on the other side of the uncrossable river. The door being drawn carefully, the right size, because Nyla had specified it, and specifications mattered. The lake didn't know any of it, but the light from the penthouse reached out toward it anyway, and the city held itself up in the dark, the way it always did. And inside the kitchen, Iris stirred the pot, and Zuri stood beside her, and neither of them needed to say the thing that was present between them, which was simply this: that women who had been handed incomplete stories about their lives had found their way to a room that was warm, and had found it by their own navigation, and the fact that it had taken longer than it should have, and cost more than it was fair to cost, did not make the arriving any less theirs. From the living room, Nyla said, "That's a good door." And Seon-jae said, "I tried to make it exactly right." And Nyla said, with the generosity of someone granting a significant concession, "You did. Okay."